Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Where on earth is Georgina? Asked Morgan, glancing out of her kitchen window of her double-storey home, half expecting to see Georgina Baldwin's car rolling up her driveway. This was a first, as Georgina was never, ever late. I have no idea what could be keeping her. I mean, when in the history of our entire lives has Georgina ever been late for anything? She said, looking up at her friend Fern, who seemed equally as bewildered by this incongruous conundrum. Out of the three women, Fern could easily be relied upon to keep the ladies waiting, and for her being late was not at all unusual, as she could be a little scatty at the very best of times. But Georgina was a different kettle of fish altogether. It was part of her punctilious character to always be efficiently organised at the very best of times. So it was not a surprise this morning that the bitter, rather unpalatable taste of concern hung in the air, for something wasn't right. Fern began to open up the Tupperware container she'd brought along with her to Morgan's house, by way of a useful distraction, as it was good to keep herself busy, especially given she was so troubled. Fern's gut was already beginning to clench, so that her lower back was aching, and her shoulders were tense and uptight. She was saying a silent prayer to herself that please God may Georgina be all right, may nothing bad have happened to her. She began generously piling some decadent chocolate brownies onto her plate, into such a huge pile, which was far too much for three women to consume, so much so it rather resembled a large pyramid. Her long, slender fingers were trembling nervously as she stacked the brownies on top of each other, like Lego blocks. The burgeoning sense of unease would not abate. It was wilfully clawing its way at the back of her throat, so much so that she was beginning to feel profoundly nauseous. "Are you all right, Fern?" asked Morgan, removing the boiling kettle from the range oven, and walking towards the three mugs splayed out on the kitchen countertop, all owning its own single spoon of coffee, along with a couple of teaspoons of coffee creamer and sugar. "You've gone terribly white all of a sudden. Goodness gracious, you're such a worrier, Fern. You're bothered, aren't you, that Georgina isn't here already? But unlike me, who believes there has to be a logical explanation as to why Georgina is so late, you are typically looking into worst-case scenarios already, aren't you, Fern? What are you like? That imagination of yours needs to be reined in, like a wild horse, if you ask me." Fern heaved a huge sigh. "You can read me like a book, can't you, Morgan? I can't help myself, can I?" she admitted. "And as for having a wild imagination, it's the bane of my life. I'm always fearing the worst. I mean, if my kids arrive home 5 minutes late from school, after being dropped off by the yellow school bus, if they're late, I start imagining that they've been abducted or something ridiculous like that. But when it comes to Georgina Baldwin, I just don't feel good about Georgina being late like this. It's just so out of character for her, that's all. I mean, have you ever once in your life known Georgina to be late for anything? Go on, admit it, Morgan. It hasn't happened once, not since we've known her. And we've known her since we were little." Morgan was pouring out the hot water from the kettle into the mugs. She paused when she reached the third mug on the countertop. If she filled it with hot water, and Georgina hadn't arrived yet, her coffee might go cold, so she decided against it. She nodded her head in agreement, her heart feeling a little heavy. Please God, she wasn't becoming paranoid like Fern. Was Fern's overactive imagination as contagious as a flu bug, she wondered? She certainly hoped not. If the truth be told, she was equally as troubled by the absence of their good friend at her home, because she knew Georgina should have been here at least 15 minutes ago. "No, I can't say I've ever known Georgina to be late," she admitted frankly. "Exactly," said Fern. "You know what Georgina's like. She's a stickler for punctuality. She has such strong views on the matter. She can't abide being late for anything. Indeed, she's always scolding me when I arrive at your house late, reminding me that even though we're the very best of friends, that my lack of punctuality is extremely rude. Let's not kid. It's in her innate nature to be supremely efficient, and that is what makes her a great attorney. If Georgina was a car, she'd probably be a Bentley. She's elegant, efficient, and extremely classy. I, on the other hand, if I was a car, I'd be a sad little Peugeot with a penchant for breaking down at the most inopportune times. I mean, I don't believe Georgina has been late a day in her life for anything. So why? Why is she not here?" Morgan tried to keep her composure and to wear a nonchalant, untroubled expression on her face, but it wasn't easy to fool Fern, whose shoulders were slumped forward, and she was currently holding the arch of her back, as if her lower back was suddenly giving her a whole lot of pain. Fern was discerning by nature, and was what some may describe as a sensitive soul. She did have an overactive imagination, which one day could be her greatest undoing if she didn't bring it into check. Maybe Fern should consider attending writing classes, where she could use her imagination as an outlet for stories, rather than bringing it into her daily life, so that she was forever worried and tormented when things didn't roll out as smoothly as she expected them to. "Fern, I wish to goodness sake you wouldn't look so stressed out. Quit frowning, will you? It doesn't suit your face. Don't worry about a thing. We're going to have a nice hot cup of coffee together and enjoy some of your delicious chocolate brownies while we wait very patiently for Georgina to arrive. She would have texted us if something was up, I'm most sure. I rather suspect she's got caught up in traffic or something. She probably can't answer our messages, because you know what she's like. She doesn't speak on her cell when she's driving. She's very responsible like that. Maybe there was an accident on the highway, and she's probably caught up in a traffic jam, but I'm sure she'll be here soon enough. Sometimes even the most punctual among us can be waylaid by life circumstances that are beyond our control, but it doesn't necessarily mean that anything bad has actually happened to her." Morgan's reassuring words had brought a very small measure of comfort to Fern. Of course, her friend was right. That must be what this was about. They had sent numerous texts to Georgina that morning, and those texts had gone unanswered, because Georgina was probably caught up in a traffic jam. And indeed, Morgan was right. If there had been an accident on the highway, Georgina would have gone out of her way to help wherever she could. That was why she'd failed to make contact with her two best friends. But she'd be here soon enough, Fern assured herself, again and again, because the alternative was not something she wanted to think about. Georgina and Morgan were like the sisters Fern had never had in life, and they were so close to her, and she couldn't imagine what her life would be like without them. And if she was to lose her friends in unforeseen circumstances, she was pretty sure she'd fall apart like a crumbling cookie. "You're right, Morgan. Let's get stuck into the coffee, shall we? And the brownies, of course. We need a useful distraction. And I could do with something sweet." "I hoped you would say that," said Morgan appreciatively. "We need to stop thinking about Georgina's whereabouts for the moment, and think about other more positive things. Maybe you can tell me how your kids are getting along at the moment." "Oh, you know, they're absolutely fine," said Fern, who had seated herself comfortably at the breakfast nook, and was warming her fingers against the mug of hot coffee. "Carol has started ballet classes. She's enjoying them very much. Her teacher says she's a natural. And James, well, he's been asking his father if he can keep bees. He fancies selling honey on the side. He's always liked the idea of being an entrepreneur, even at his young age. He wants to call the honey he sells Honey by James. Quite a sweet name, actually, I think. But what a lovely idea! To keep bees, I mean, said Morgan, trying to draw Fern away from thinking about Georgina. As long as he doesn't have allergies, of course, to bee venom, then I think it's a great idea. And with James only being 11 years old, it's good to start young in becoming an entrepreneur. I believe as parents we should encourage our children to think outside the box, just like James is doing. As parents, we don't want to become like those parents that give in to their kids' every whim, so that when they do venture out into the big wide world, they're completely useless at applying themselves to anything, because they're so used to being mollycoddled by their parents. Fern appeared to be silent for a long time, almost as if her thoughts were miles and miles away. She seemed to have distanced herself from the conversation, as if her mind had drifted into an alternative reality, and she was failing to hear anything that Morgan was saying to her. She glanced again out of the window, her eyes focusing on Morgan's driveway, and it was clear that trying to change the conversation from Georgina over to any other subjects, even her own children, was futile. Morgan sighed. It was no use carrying on this conversation with Fern, not when she was being like this. Fern looked so disquieted. Her fair skin had taken on a grey hue, and under the table she was banging her feet nervously against the floor, as if tapping a drum very quietly. Morgan knew that this was a self-soothing gesture that her friend tended to adopt when she was extremely discomforted by something. "Please don't keep looking out of the window, Fern," she said, reaching out with a hand to give Fern's arm a tight, reassuring squeeze. "You're making things 1,000 times worse for yourself by worrying like this. And you know what the biggest joke is of all? I read somewhere that half the things we tend to worry about never materialize at all, and I believe that's true. Besides, you know what they say, Fern. A watched pot never actually boils. You're right about that," said Fern, now turning her attention away from the window, reaching out to grab one of her chocolate brownies. She took a big bite, enjoying the fudgy sweetness of the rich chocolate. She had indeed made an exceptionally good batch of brownies this week, as some batches were a bit hit and miss, and some were better than others, even though the recipe always remained the same, which was something she could never quite understand. The three women loved Fern's brownies, but she refused to share with them her secret recipe, for it had belonged to her great-grandmother, that the family insisted could not be shared with anyone. "Oh, these are excellent," said Morgan, taking a large bite of her brownie. "No one makes brownies quite like you, Fern." "Well, I can't take credit for the recipe, can I? It's my great-grandmother's secret recipe. So if she's listening to you from beyond the grave, it's her that you need to be thanking, not me." Morgan responded by waving a mischievous finger at Fern. "One of these days when you're a little tipsy," she said with a teasing wink, "I'm going to get that brownie recipe out of you. See if I don't." "Not a chance of that ever happening," chuckled Fern, taking another bite of her brownie. "If I revealed my great-grandmother's secret recipe, she'd probably haunt me from beyond the grave. And I'm not kidding about that either. So I'm sorry, much as I love you, Morgan, as if you were my own sister. Great-grandmother's secret is never to be shared, not even with my two very best friends." It was every week that the three women got together on a Wednesday morning at about 9:30 for tea at Morgan's house. Georgina, who was an attorney, always managed to get every Wednesday morning off, and she'd used the spare time to meet up with her two best friends. The three young women had grown up together and had been inseparable ever since. When they became teenagers, they swore that when they got older, they'd never ever lose touch, and they had remained true to their promises. These days they lived quite close to each other in Nova Scotia, and they had become as close as sisters. Indeed, there were many locals in the area that believed the three women were related, because in an odd, rather peculiar way, they looked uncannily alike, if that was at all possible. Maybe you really do become like the company you tend to keep. All three women had their hair dyed the same honey blonde colour, from the same hairdressers in town, and their hair was shoulder length, and in similar styles. They had fair skin and blue eyes, and were in relatively good shape, although Morgan sometimes over Christmas tended to put on an extra 10 pounds in weight, but she always managed to lose it the following year by following a rigidly strict Weight Watchers diet. Morgan sighed with relief when she heard the sound of Georgina's silver Mercedes rolling down her driveway. She didn't need to glance out of her kitchen window to feel reassured that Georgina at long last had arrived at her home, for she'd recognized the sound of Georgina's car engine from a mile away. Morgan was pretty certain there was a very good reason why their good friend had been held up, and she was keen to find out why Georgina was so incredibly late this morning. "Fern," she said, pressing her nose to the window. "Guess who's just arrived? It's Georgina," she said brightly with a warm smile lighting up her blue eyes. "Didn't I tell you, Fern, Georgina would be here, and that you were worrying unnecessarily? She must have been held up, that's what it was. I told you nothing bad had happened to her. She was just waylaid, wasn't she? It happens to the best of us." "Oh, I feel so relieved," said Fern, rising quickly to her feet and brushing away some of the crumbs from the brownies that had gathered on her sweater. "I wish I didn't worry like this so much. If I don't watch myself, I'll end up having a nervous breakdown. My husband is always warning me about that." She was holding her hand on her chest to calm her heartbeats down. "What am I like?" she chuckled. "Worrying for nothing like this." Both Morgan and Fern were stay-at-home mothers who had 2 children between the ages of 10 and 13, and all 3 women had 1 boy and girl of similar ages. Georgina Baldwin had always been the ambitious one of the 3 women. She worked full-time as a very successful, affluent attorney, while her husband Keith Baldwin stayed at home and took care of their 2 kids, 10-year-old Danny and 8-year-old Fawn. The couple had agreed that while Georgina went to work, her husband Keith, who was an aspiring author, would look after the children when they returned home from school, take care of the grocery shopping, and so forth, while at the same time working on his book that he was absolutely certain would one day end up on the New York Times bestseller list and change the fortunes of his family for good. Georgina had encouraged Keith to write the book he longed to write, because she'd been earning more than enough money to support the family and pay for her children's private school fees and extracurricular activities. But 7 years on, her husband Keith appeared to be making little progress with his literary aspirations, although he had led Georgina to believe that his bestseller he was supposed to be writing was very close to completion. But it was only recently that Georgina had expressed scepticism about her husband's book, and wondered if he was making any progress at all, for he simply refused to tell her anything about the book he was writing, apart from the fact that it would change their lives and be an international bestseller. Georgina had wondered more than once, in a moment of private, rather soulful contemplation, whether it was all a pipe dream on her husband's part, but the last thing she wanted to do was to discourage Keith, as creativity of any kind should always be nurtured. "I just don't believe my husband Keith has nearly finished his book, as he claims," she told her 2 best friends in confidence the previous Wednesday over tea, where the 3 women had met up at Morgan's house. Failing that, they'd sometimes organise a lunch date together, usually at their favourite Italian restaurant in town that was well known for its delectable all-you-can-eat pastas. "I mean, if the truth be told, he's so desperately secretive and guarded about everything he writes. He locks himself away in his study for hours on end in order to write his book, which I can understand. But he tells me nothing about the plots or the characters that he's writing about," she had complained rather bitterly. "It's really beginning to bother me, you know. I mean, I'm supporting our family financially and have been doing so for the last 7 years. And I think I have a right to know what my husband is writing about, don't you? But he simply refuses to let me in. And I'm beginning to find his evasiveness and clandestine secretness exceedingly annoying." Morgan looked cynical. "You know you're right, Georgina. You've been supporting your family financially, and your husband Keith hasn't done a damn thing to help you around the house. I mean, he's been working on that book of his for 7 years, and your husband is refusing to tell you anything about the characters and the plot of his novel. I'm sorry, but it sounds very iffy to me. Why is he so convinced it'll be a bestseller anyway? How can he so presumptuously predict that his work is going to be such an outstanding success? Think about how many writers send off their work to publishing houses to be rejected over and over again. It happened to J.K. Rowling, you know, until finally she found a publisher who accepted her work. And of course the rest is history. Hers was a success story of note. But her story was the exception to the rule. It's not like that for your average aspiring author. And contrary to what people may think, it's not an easy profession to get into. And not many people succeed. Well, my husband believes in his ability to write, said Georgina, and I have the utmost of faith in him. I mean, what kind of a wife would I be if I didn't? You know what they say. Creativity should always be encouraged. But you haven't seen any of his work, Morgan insisted. How do you know he's good? He says he's good, but you've only got his word for it. Has he written any publications that you know anything about? Essays or articles, for example, that can give you an insight or idea of his potential as a writer? You've only heard from the horse's mouth that he's good. But how do you know that's actually true? Well, he has an English degree behind him, doesn't he? So surely that must count for something. Not necessarily. A degree doesn't guarantee anything, said Fern, who had interjected herself into the conversation. You can be good at English, but it doesn't mean you can write. Writing is a skill. You also need an active imagination, and everything else besides. Anyway, writing is an art form. I mean, you may have all the tools to create a magnificent piece of art, but if you don't know how to paint, how are you going to bring it all together? Not everyone has what it takes to become an accomplished author. They may think they do, of course, but they could be lying to themselves or genuinely believe that they are good when they're not at all. I mean, think of all those people that enter singing competitions, for example, on programs like America's Got Talent. I gather, in some of those auditions, many of the applicants seriously believe they can sing like an angel, and don't even realise they sing so badly, and that they're completely tone deaf. I mean, think about it, Georgina. What do you really know about your husband's ability to write? You're just taking his word for it that he's a great writer. If you ask me, the very fact that he shares nothing with you about the progress he's making on his book, and the way you claim he reacts when you ask him anything about it, is decidedly odd as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he should at least have let you read an example of his work, don't you think? It sounds to me as if he's hiding something from you. What are you suggesting? Georgina had asked, looking slightly rattled. Are you saying that my husband is stringing me along and not actually writing this book of his? Please, God, you don't think that, do you? Well, it's a possibility, isn't it? Said Fern. It wouldn't be the first time that has happened. Think about it. I mean, Keith has a great deal, doesn't he? He's got a roof over his head, a comfortable home, food in his belly, and no responsibility whatsoever, apart from, well, attending to the kids after they return from school, and making them lunch every day. He can get out of bed when he likes, and sleep in late, and you won't even know a thing about it. From what you've told us over the years, he's very good at spending your money, with not much to show for any of it, if you ask me. You go out to work, you cover all the family costs and bills, and the mortgage as well. You've paid for his extravagant, very costly flights to go overseas, so he can do some much-needed research for his so-called book that you know nothing about. He's at home all the time claiming to write this book, but why hasn't he shown you even a page of his work? You've invested so much in him, along with a great deal of blind faith, if you ask me. But you're just being incredibly naive about all this because you want to believe the best in your husband, Georgina. But you've got to start asking yourself some very tough questions. But don't you understand, Fern? Keith does not want me to see his book, not until it's accepted by a publishing house, and until it's published, and on the bestseller list. Then after that he wants me to read his book when it's in print, and I can appreciate that. It was this time that Morgan was the one who snorted. I'm sorry. I hate to say this, Georgina, but Fern is absolutely right. I have to agree with her on this one. She had put a gentle hand on Georgina. You're a brilliant woman, Georgina, with so much talent, believe me. You're highly regarded in the legal community, and especially by the likes of me and Fern. You're an absolute brilliant attorney. No one can dispute that for a second. You're astute and very accomplished. Yet when it comes to your husband Keith, you have far more faith in him than he actually deserves. I'm sorry to say this, Georgina, because I know you don't want to hear this. But Keith has done nothing over the last 7 years to show or prove to you that he's accomplished anything at all. I mean, in 7 years, he hasn't even told you what his book is about. And that strikes me as bizarrely insane. Why all this evasiveness? Why all this secrecy? If he wants to be a stay-at-home father, fair enough, taking care of your children, while you bring in the money. I can understand that. A lot of people have that kind of arrangement, when one partner earns more than another. And you earn a great salary, Georgina. But I'm worried Keith might be taking advantage of you. Surely you want him to pull his weight around the house. From what you told me, you often arrive home and the dishes haven't even been washed or put away. He doesn't even make dinner in the evenings for you, when you've been out at work all day. You're the one that comes home, gets dinner started and cleans up, which boggles my mind. You're the one paying all the bills for the last 7 years or so. If you remember, Keith asked you for 1 year off to write his book, and now it's been 7. How long is this going to go on for? Georgina paused for a brief moment. Her face had grown ashen. As Morgan's sobering words appeared to have hit a raw nerve with her, her good friend had expressed what she'd been clandestinely thinking about over the last couple of years or so, but hadn't actually had the courage to dare to admit to herself, rather like some clever avoidance tactic that could stop her from facing the truth head-on, like a pair of glaring headlights. You think I've given him far too much leeway in his writing, don't you? She said soberly. I've been too easy on him, I guess. Perhaps he's been slacking on the book, because he's not accountable to anyone, is he? He doesn't have any deadlines to meet, and he can cruise along at his own leisurely pace, without a care in the world, which gives him plenty of room to procrastinate, or become rather lazy. Maybe he's even losing interest in his writing project, but doesn't want to admit that to me. I sincerely hope that that is not the case. But unfortunately, Keith can be as closed up as a sea clam, and getting anything out of him is extremely difficult, I find. Who knows how far he's got with his work, Georgina? But yes, I think you've been far too easy on him. You let him get away with murder. He tells you nothing about the book he's writing. I'm just a little concerned, that's all. Because recently you've been paying for first-class plane tickets to exotic destinations all over the world for the purposes of research when it comes to your husband's book. And yet you have no clue what he's actually writing about. If my husband wanted to jet off to glamorous destinations all over the world, if he was investing in some kind of project, I think I'd like to know what it was all about, don't you? And I probably would want to accompany him on his adventure and bring along the kids for the journey, because it might be a fun experience. But he tells you nothing. Of course, I appreciate writers' need to research the background of some of their novels, and sometimes going to a beautiful destination can inspire their creative juices to flow more abundantly. I get that, I really do. But you have to ask yourself, Georgina, a very hard, uncomfortable question. Why has Keith not shown you anything he's been writing for 7 whole years, for goodness sake? I'm sorry to be so brutal, Georgina, but how do you know the book your husband is writing even exists? Asked Morgan, her steely blue eyes fixing on Georgina, with a kind of look that suggested that she genuinely believed that although Georgina was astute about many things, she was fast asleep as far as her husband was concerned. Georgina's face flushed appropriately a rather pinkish colour, the heat suddenly rising to her cheeks, for her friend's candid honesty had taken her somewhat aback. Georgina was an attractive woman in her early 40s, and always looked elegantly attired and well presented. She was the kind of attorney many were eager to put their faith in, as she was very good and accomplished at her job. But when it came to her personal life, she seemed to look at it through rose-coloured spectacles. Perhaps she didn't want to see all the parts of her life that seemed more than a little misaligned, like when you look at something a little too closely, perhaps, and become all the more aware of all the imperfections, when it's so much easier to pretend that they don't even exist in the first place. Denial was certainly gratifying, when it meant avoiding some rather discombobulating truths that you didn't want to address. For Georgina there was no doubt that her friend's words had seriously rattled her. It was rather like both Morgan and Fern were encouraging her to take a closer look at her husband Keith, and the thought made her feel extremely uncomfortable. It was true every time she had confronted Keith about the novel he appeared to be writing, that he claimed would one day be an international bestseller. He would become decidedly defensive, sometimes aggressively so, and then he'd bring on some rather alarmingly childish tactics, from sulking to stamping his feet and slamming every single door in the house, to make his point very clear. Sometimes Keith would behave like a petulant, spoilt teenager, and Georgina would often think her two children were a lot more grown up than he actually was. "What is it you want to know, Georgina?" he would ask her very abruptly, his dark eyes narrowing, while his lip would tremble. He looked as if any second he might potentially explode and go off into one of his temper tantrums. It was when her husband reacted like this that Georgina had wanted to close down the conversation almost immediately, as by nature she hated causing her husband undue upset or rubbing him up the wrong way. The next thing she knew, he'd become disagreeably cantankerous, so for the last 7 years she had been treading on eggshells with him, just to keep the peace in their household. "I just want to know how your book is coming along," she would say to him, trying to sound as casual as she could. "There's no need to be so reactive, Keith. I'm asking you a simple question, that's all. I'd just like to know how your book is coming along," she would say to him, trying to sound as casual as she could. "There's no need to be so defensive. Can't I ask my husband a simple question without having my head bitten off? I'm not your enemy, Keith. I'm on your side. I'm invested in your book as much as you are, I'll have you know." "The book is coming along just fine, I'll have you know, Georgina," Keith would snap rather indignantly, his face looking disagreeably chastened. "I don't need you asking me all these questions, do I? I need to focus on the plot of my story, which is becoming extremely exciting. It's a story with so many suspenseful twists and turns that the reader will never ever anticipate. And it's in all these teasers that will make my book a rip-roaring success. J.K. Rowling can eat her heart out. She ain't got nothing on me. I can see my book on display in all the bookshops in the town, and people lining up to get my signature from me. This book I'm writing is going to be one of a kind, let me tell you, and people will be talking about it long after I'm gone." "I hope that's true, love, I really do. I do admire your confidence and faith in your work. But for your sake, I hope your dreams do come into fruition one day, as you've been working so desperately hard on that book of yours. But why are you being so evasive, so desperately guarded about everything? Your attitude does irk me a little, you know. I'd like to know what you're writing about. Can't you at the very least read me a paragraph from your work? I'd love to hear it, I really would." "So is that it, Georgina? You want to spoil everything, do you, by insisting on a sneak preview before the appointed time? I'm sorry, but that's never going to happen. You know how important my work is to me. I'm writing a bestseller that's going to change our lives forever on the financial front. Pardon me if I don't want to share the details of my story with you. I told you I want it all to be a lovely surprise, and you could be the first person after the publisher to read my book. I'm going to dedicate my book to you because you believe in me. Well, at least I hope you do. But after all this cross-examining on your part, I'm beginning to doubt you have any faith in me at all. In fact, I'm beginning to doubt it very much." "Don't be so ridiculous, Keith. Listen to yourself. You do tend to overreact. You know I've always believed in your capabilities. If I didn't, I wouldn't have been the one supporting you financially for the past 7 years or so, for the purposes of allowing you to write your book and explore your talent. But why don't you give me a sneak preview of what you've already written? I think I could give you very good feedback from a reader's perspective. I could tell you what I think of your plot and your characters. See whether the twists and turns in your book that you talk about have me on the edge of my seat. I think my opinion could be invaluable to you. You never know, I might give you some good pointers." "I don't need your opinion, love. What I'm writing is nobody's business until it's published. I'd like you to respect and honour my privacy in this regard. It'll be worth your while, I can promise you that. Just give me more time. You won't be disappointed. My book is very nearly completed."
Georgina had tried to put on a positive front, but her heart sank, and she felt herself become as wilted and as sad as a dying wild flower in an alpine field. Perhaps she had sensed that Keith's reluctance to share with her anything about the book he was writing gave her a profound sense that something was up with her husband. But the doubt she was having made her feel as if she was being unreasonably demanding. But why all the secrecy, the reluctance to even give her a clue about what his novel was about? She didn't even know how many chapters he had written yet, how successful his studies had been when he had taken trips abroad for the purposes of his research. It was when Fern and Morgan had been asking awkward yet thought-provoking questions about her husband's book, and about his strange defensive behaviour in not allowing her to know what he was writing about, had certainly made her wonder if for 7 years whether her husband had been writing anything at all. She chastised herself for doubting Keith's integrity, but she couldn't help herself. 7 years had gone by, and Keith had not even revealed a single detail about the book he was writing. It would seem every time she'd asked him a question, he completely shut her down, and made her feel like a monster about even harmlessly inquiring about the book. Was that even normal behaviour coming from her husband, she wondered? She didn't think it was. Morgan looked apologetic about sharing her misgivings about Georgina's husband, but she couldn't help herself. She needed to tell Georgina exactly what she felt. "I know you don't want to hear what me and Fern have been thinking about in regards to your husband Keith," she had said very matter-of-factly at tea the previous Wednesday. "But we really do have your best interests at heart, Georgina. We just hope Keith isn't pulling the fast one on you, that's all, and taking advantage of your good nature. You're a kind, generous, loving woman, Georgina, and people as giving as you can be exploited. We care about you, Georgina. You're like a sister to us, and I'd hate to see you being duped. That's all I'm saying." "What's that supposed to mean, Morgan?" Georgina had snapped, looking somewhat irritated. "Are you implying that over the last 7 years that my husband has been duplicitously deceiving me all this time by pretending to write a novel? Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds? Why on earth would he do that to me? The idea is preposterously insane. If that were really the case, what would he have been doing all this time? Sitting at a desk, biting his nails while watching Netflix? No, I don't think so." "I just wonder how well you know your husband, Georgina, that's all. Maybe he's lazy by nature. Possibly one of those people that wants to sponge off his wife financially so he can get up late, order pizza and watch movies all day to his heart's content, as well as taking himself off on exciting holidays where he stays at the best hotels, all for the purposes of research. But what if he's not researching anything at all, but sponging off you so that he can go on these amazing holidays on your dime? Think about it, Georgina. You do get people who are hardwired to take advantage of others, and sometimes they pull the wool over their eyes so they don't realize they're being exploited. The kind of people that borrow money from you and never ever pay you back, or who sleep on your couch and never move out after promising you that they'll inconvenience you only for a couple of days. And then what happens? Weeks later they're still living on your couch. Most people know someone with those very lazy character traits. My mother would always say it's useless to help people who always exploit others like this, because they'll bring you down with them, rather like a drowning man. When you say no to such people, or dare to even ask them to repay a loan that you gave them in the first place when they asked you if they could borrow some money from you, they begin to abhor you and hate you for having the sheer audacity to want your money back. In the end, the very people you helped hate you for doing them a favour. But Keith's not like that, Georgina," she insisted. "He's got big dreams. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm making enough money for him to take a few years off to write his novel, and I don't want to deny him that. And also, he's doing a great job in watching over my children for me. Personally, I saw it as a win-win situation for our family. You have no idea how hard my husband works.
He locks himself away in his study for hours on end. But when the children are home, he spends some quality time with them. He makes them lunch, and he helps them with their homework. He even plays ball with our son Danny for a short while. He loves to spend time with my children, and that's all I ask of him. The arrangement works extremely well for us. I couldn't do without him, I really couldn't. And I certainly do not believe for a second he's been exploiting me, as you so suggest. Nor do I think he'd willingly take advantage of me. I'm so sorry. I really am, Georgina, Fern had said quickly. Don't get upset, honestly. Take no notice of the two of us. We probably don't know what we're talking about. Just watch this space. We'll both have egg on our faces when your husband's book comes out, and it hits the bestseller list. You'll be the one saying, "I told you so." Georgina had ruefully managed a half-hearted smile. The truth was she had known her friends' inquiries were well-meaning, and furthermore, they were both absolutely right. Keith was definitely hiding something from her, and she meant to find out exactly what it was. Enough was enough. She needed answers, and needed them now. The time had run out for her husband, and she wanted accountability from him. If he'd been lying to her about the book he claimed to be writing for the last 7 years or so, then she'd do her nut, and probably throw a wobbly. If he'd been lying to her, taking advantage of her financially, she didn't know how she would handle the situation. Sometimes the truth can be profoundly cruel, and maybe she didn't want to face it at all. But now she knew she couldn't go on without addressing the elephant in the room that she'd been avoiding for so long. On this morning, when Georgina had arrived late for tea with her two friends, they were waiting for her expectantly in the kitchen, with questions in their eyes. For everyone knew that Georgina had never been late for a rendezvous a day in her life, until now, of course. So both women naturally wanted to know what was going on with their good friend. Georgina had let herself into the house as she always did, and had entered the kitchen with a less than confident swagger. The normally self-assured woman looked so extraordinarily different this morning, so much so that Morgan was rather taken aback by Georgina's rather dishevelled appearance. Georgina was always immaculately attired, with not even a single hair out of place. She would wear extremely smart, well-fitting business suits that looked stylishly elegant, and her porcelain skin was always brightened by a touch of makeup. But this morning Georgina's makeup-free skin was dull. There were dark rings circling around the underside of her blue eyes that appeared puffy and red, almost as if she'd been crying. Her hair looked as if she'd forsaken the hairbrush, for it was flat on one side, as if she'd fallen asleep for a moment, and got up without bothering to brush her hair before she left the house. If that wasn't weird enough, she was wearing a pair of very old ripped jeans with tears around the knee area, and a rather dull-looking grey sweatshirt that looked as if it had been washed over 100 times in the washing machine. It was lifeless, creased-looking, and the colour did her no favours. Morgan couldn't remember the last time she'd seen Georgina in jeans before, as Georgina claimed that she regarded jeans as extremely outdated, and should only ever be worn when you're doing a spring clean around the house. Everything about her dishevelled appearance that morning was untidy, unkempt, and almost scatty. Even the laces of one of her trainers had come undone, and she didn't appear to notice that she could potentially trip over her laces if she didn't tie them up. All Morgan could think was what the hell had happened to Georgina. Something was absurdly wrong with her. She looked more like a teenager that had lost her way, rather than the successful attorney that she clearly was. "Oh, I'm sorry I'm late," said Georgina as she entered the kitchen, her voice sounding both flat and tired. "I just lost all track of time." At this, both Morgan and Fern exchanged awkward but secret glances between each other. Georgina losing track of time. When did that ever happen? "Is everything all right, Georgina?" asked Morgan gingerly. "You look rather flustered, if you don't mind my saying so. And I can't remember the last time you ever wore jeans, especially jeans like that. I thought you hated jeans. You said they were so last year. I take it you're not going to work, based on what you're wearing today, because somehow I don't think you'd be seen dead in your offices, dressed as you are now." "No, you're right, I'm not going to work, not for a few days anyway," Georgina admitted. "And yes, you better believe it, I'm extremely flustered, and as for wearing jeans, well, I grabbed anything I could out of the wardrobe. and I realize I look as if I'm about to repaint the house, but I assure you I'm not. That is the last thing on my mind. I just had one hell of an evening last night, that's all. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure whether I'm coming or going. But I'm gagging for a mug of coffee, if one is going spare. It was all I could think of on my way here. I desperately need some caffeine in my system to give me some energy. I feel completely depleted and deflated, and coffee might help to resurrect my mood right now. I feel as flat as a pancake that was cooked without any raising agent in it. And I probably look like a pancake, too. I'm glad I didn't take a look at myself in the mirror, because based on the way you both are looking at me, I guess I'm a sorry sight for sore eyes, and I do apologize for that profusely. You do look rather unkempt, admitted Morgan. You're certainly going to need that mug of coffee, she said, quickly shooting over to the kettle and preparing Georgina a mug. She knew something had happened to Georgina, for her to appear so overwrought like this, but she also appreciated that she needed to exercise a little patience until Georgina was willing to talk about whatever it was that had reduced her to a shadow of her former self. Morgan and Fern patiently sat at the kitchen breakfast nook, their inquiring eyes fixed steadily on their friend, as they watched Georgina chug all the coffee down and bite into a chocolate brownie, which she chewed rather slowly, as if to savour the flavour. Then she said, "Well, where do I begin? I just don't know." "Well, if you're going to tell us why you're in such a state, that might be a good place to start," Morgan suggested. "If you don't mind my saying so, Georgina, you look like a chicken that's run into a fox in the chicken coop. Something bad must have happened last night. We are the best of friends. We're here for you. You can tell us anything. You know you can." Georgina briefly glanced from both Fern to Morgan, and then said, "Well, I'm very lucky. I appreciate the two of you so very much. You have no idea. And in fact, it's such a relief to get everything off my chest. I think I'll feel better for it. Remember when I was here last Wednesday? You were asking me all kinds of rather awkward questions about the book that Keith was writing, where you expressed your extreme misgivings about why he was being so defensively guarded about his work. You do remember that, don't you?" "Oh, I'm sorry about that," said Fern quickly. "We didn't mean to upset you, Georgina. I felt very bad going on in the way that I did, and so did Morgan. You looked extremely disquieted. If that is what this is about, Georgina, we're sincerely sorry. We really are, aren't we, Morgan?" "Of course we are," Morgan agreed. "We were only looking out for you, Georgina. You're not still upset about all that, are you? That's not what this is about, is it?" "No. In fact, I'm very glad you asked me all those questions. The truth is, I've been asking myself those questions over the last couple of years, but have failed to be completely honest with myself. I guess, if the truth be told, when an issue is uncomfortably too close to home, you gloss over it, don't you? I think it's part of human nature, the preservation of our species, so to speak, to have a propensity to lie to oneself when the truth can be so terribly inconvenient. Rather like a woman who knows her husband is cheating on her, but hasn't got the balls to admit it to herself, because it has the inconvenient potential to shatter her life into hundreds of pieces and upset everything she's ever known. So what does that woman do? She goes along with the status quo, even though she's doing herself a serious disservice by living in such abject denial. I guess I was doing much the same with Keith. I just didn't want to believe that he would be taking advantage of me by expecting me to support him for 7 years while he did absolutely nothing but make the kids lunch when they returned home from school. I really wanted to believe he was writing that book and was eager to give him the benefit of the doubt. But after our lengthy discussions last Wednesday, when you both expressed serious misgivings over Keith's unorthodox behaviour, I guess you could say something was eating away at me inside. I had this gnawing feeling that refused to abate. It was making me question everything about my relationship with Keith. Anyway, last night I decided to come right out with it and ask him a whole bunch of really uncomfortable questions. And let's just say, everything finally came to a head. "You mean you had a confrontation with Keith?" asked Fern, looking somewhat bemused. "In a manner of speaking, I did. Let's just say I had it out with him. I told him I didn't believe he'd been writing a novel, because if he had been writing a book, I should know something about it. I asked him to take me into his study and show me the chapters he'd written, and the evidence that he was indeed writing this book of his. I said I didn't need to know what the story was about, but just to show me his work, just to date, so that I could see he was indeed writing the book. I told him that I was tired of him fobbing me off all the time, and telling me exactly what I wanted to hear. I told him I wanted to see the hard evidence that he was indeed doing what he said he was doing.
How did he react to that? Asked Morgan. I bet he wasn't pleased. No doubt your interrogation probably went down with like a lead balloon with him.
That's an understatement, I'm afraid. If you must know, I had tucked my children up in bed, and I cooked spaghetti bolognese for our dinner. I opened a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon for us to enjoy. I figured with a couple of glasses of alcohol inside him, Keith might find it easier to talk, because I knew he'd probably have a temper tantrum the moment I addressed his work that he was doing on his book. Every time I ask him questions, he literally flies off the handle. So I was preparing myself for that. But I hoped that the wine might go some way to making him less angry about my inquiries.
I don't get why you cook dinner for him when you return home from work after such a long day. Shouldn't Keith be the one doing that? Said Morgan with a frown. See what I mean? He takes advantage of you, Georgina, but you failed to see that.
Well, I've always made dinner for us, said Georgina matter-of-factly, as if it was no big deal for her. But we don't tend to have wine with every meal. But let's just say last night was the exception to that rule. As I was saying, I figured the alcohol would make Keith unwind, loosen up a little, and I hoped it would do the same for me, because I was very reluctant to ask him all those questions, believe me, based on how defensive he usually becomes. And you know me, by nature I will do anything to preserve the peace. When I got home, he was working in the study, so I decided to get dinner started. Keith finally came out of his study, saying things smelled very delicious, and we began to eat our meal together. And that was when I started asking the awkward questions that I'd been meaning to ask, but never had quite the guts to do it.
What do you mean by it didn't go well? Asked Fern. Do you mean he became defensive again?
Well, of course he became defensive, but I wouldn't have expected anything less. In truth, he was behaving like he always does when I ask him anything awkward, like a petulant, self-entitled child that's having a temper tantrum because he's being asked to eat his spinach by his parents. Actually, it was worse than that. He threw the glass of wine that I'd given him at the kitchen wall, and wine was scattered everywhere as well as glass. In fact, the wine was pouring down the walls. It looked like a treacherous murder scene. Quite horrific it was. And if that wasn't enough drama for you, and overreaction on Keith's part, he picked up the plate of spaghetti bolognese that I was eating. He didn't pick up his own. No, he grabbed mine and threw it at me. My suit was covered in stains, and I looked a dreadful mess. But I ignored it all and told him to calm the hell down and to show me the book he was writing, because I wanted to see it right now, and I was not going to take no for an answer. "So you don't believe I've been writing my book?" he screamed at me. "I told you that you have no faith in me." "I just want to see the evidence that you are writing this book," I told him. "Both Morgan and Fern think I need to ask you some tough questions. They think something isn't adding up about the book you're claiming to write, Keith, and they make some good points there." "So they put you up to this, did they? Typical. You women are absolutely disgusting, the whole lot of you. Always conspiring against men. No wonder so many men are single these days. I might have known those friends of yours would go stirring the pot up like this. Why don't those nosy friends of yours mind their own bloody business and stop poking their noses into our affairs where they don't belong? Keith, please don't swear. It's very unattractive. All I ask is you show me that they are wrong about all this. I've got faith that you are indeed writing this book. Just show me your work. That's all I'm asking. I just need to feel assured that you are writing this novel of yours." At that moment Keith's face went bright red, I think his cheeks were burning. His dark eyes became almost frightened. He looked like a cornered animal. He began clutching his chest very suddenly, and then he told me he was about to have a heart attack, and asked me to call the ambulance at once. "Good Lord," said Morgan. "Did you call the ambulance? Or was Keith pulling a farce on you? To avoid any confrontation?" Well, when Keith told me he was having a heart attack, I didn't know what to think, to tell you the truth, but I wasn't going to take any chances on that, so I called the ambulance at once. The EMTs arrived rather promptly. They checked my husband over, and his vitals seemed all right, although they claimed his heart was racing, and they wanted to take him to the hospital to get a medical evaluation from a doctor, so I followed the ambulance in my Mercedes with my 2 kids in the back seat of the car. I had to wake them up, as I couldn't leave them behind at home unattended. I changed into those jeans, and the jeans I'm wearing now, as my work clothes were completely covered in spaghetti bolognese. It was about 10:15 at night, and I don't think the EMTs were remotely worried about Keith's physical condition, because they said they were sure he was absolutely fine, but they just needed to take him to the hospitals just to be sure. The ambulance didn't engage in the flashing red emergency lights or rush through the traffic lights at the speed of a car on steroids. Nothing like that. It just lackadaisically ambled through the traffic like any other regular car, so they clearly weren't worried about Keith's condition, and nor was I. One of the paramedics said he probably had a panic attack, and that was what this was about, and I believed that was the case. Furthermore, I was absolutely sure I was the one that had provoked the panic attack in the first place, with all the questions I'd asked him that he clearly did not want to answer. "Well, he probably had a panic attack," said Morgan with a smirk. "He knew the gig was up. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Georgina. Please go on." Georgina took another sip of coffee, as Morgan had filled up her mug again. "Let's see, where was I?" "You said you followed the ambulance to the hospital," Morgan reminded her. "Oh, yes, that's right. Well, that was some journey, let me tell you. Anyway, my husband was taken into the hospital for a routine checkup, while me and the kids waited in the reception area to find out what was going on with him. Once the doctor had evaluated him, of course, I wasn't remotely worried about him at all. Thought he was absolutely fine. Danny, of course, was asking me if Daddy was going to be all right. I told him I thought his father had just had a panic attack. He asked me what a panic attack was, and I said it's when a person starts to become anxious over something. He asked why Dad would be anxious, and I didn't tell him it was because I'd been asking all kinds of questions about the work he's been doing of late on his so-called book. I just told my son that people sometimes get anxious about things. I said to him it was like doing a test at school and worrying you'd failed, and you become afraid about getting your results back, and maybe you panic. I explained the apprehension can lead to becoming so panicked you think you're having a heart attack, when you're really not. "That's a very good way of putting it," said Morgan, looking impressed. "Well, I guess it was the only way I could describe a panic attack to my son, but he seemed to understand. I told him that I was almost 100% certain that his father would be absolutely fine. I noticed my daughter Fawn wasn't saying anything at all. She just chewed her fingernails nervously. A habit that she recently adapted, which annoys me greatly, I have to say. When the doctor came into the reception area, he looked rather flustered. He told me he needed a quiet word with me in private, without the kids. I insisted the kids were present with me to hear what the doctor had to say. I don't believe in keeping things from the children. I was wondering why I'd been called into this private room anyway, because that usually only happens to people when a patient has died or is seriously ill. That was when the doctor said to me, "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Baldwin. I don't know how to tell you this, but your husband Keith has just passed away." "What?" said Morgan, her eyes growing wide. "Keith is dead? What the hell? I thought you said he had a panic attack. I thought it wasn't serious. Now you're telling me he's actually gone and kicked the bucket. Are you kidding me? Is this some kind of wacko joke? Because if it is, I'm not laughing. Keith is young. Why would he just pop his clogs like that? It makes no sense at all." "Well, I thought very much the same. I was sure there had to be a mistake somewhere along the line. I mean, Keith is 45 years old, is he not? I said to the doctor, 'But you've got this terribly wrong, Doc. My husband was having a panic attack. Even the EMT said as much, which is why they didn't even rush him to the hospital in the ambulance. And now you're telling me my husband is deceased? You must be wrong. Are you talking about my husband or some other patient, perhaps? Maybe you've got your wires crossed." When I said that, the doctor looked decidedly uncomfortable, so much so I almost felt sorry for him, even though I was the one hearing this dreadful news. He said to me, "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Baldwin, but there is no mistake. It is your husband that has passed away. When he arrived at the hospital, he had a sudden massive cardiac arrest. He clutched his chest, keeled over on the floor. He had no pulse. We called out a code blue on him. We put the paddles on him. I'm afraid he did come around one time, but we lost him again, despite our very best efforts. And we did break a couple of ribs in the process, but we couldn't bring him back. We believe the heart attack was brought on by extreme anxiety. The EMTs claimed that on the way to the hospital, he appeared very panicked about something. He claimed he couldn't breathe. I don't know what to say. I'm very sorry for your loss. Losing your husband at such a young age, dying at 45 from a heart attack, is more common than you know, surprisingly enough. Much more common than it was 15 years ago. I don't really understand why, but one theory is that people these days are exposed to so much more stress than in the past, and stress is a silent killer. Anyone can tell you that." Believe me, I was shaking all over like a leaf because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Both my children were completely nonchalant and insouciant about the revelation that their father was now deceased. They took the news alarmingly well. Danny even asked the doctor, "But are you sure he's really dead?" And my daughter, Fawn, sounded happy to hear the news. She said, "Does that mean Daddy's not coming back and he's really gone?" "Good Lord," said Morgan. "Are you saying your children were happy their father was dead? You've got to be kidding me. Maybe they reacted rather strangely because they were in shock. That can happen, you know." "Well, they weren't exactly sad to hear the news," Georgina admitted. "At the time, I thought it was because they were in shock. I was to learn later that I was wrong about that. I mean, I didn't cry, did I? I went completely numb. So I pretty much thought the kids were reacting the same way as I was." "Good Lord," said Fern, trying to get her head around the fact that Georgina's husband was actually dead. No wonder she looked dishevelled this morning. The poor woman had probably not even had a wink of sleep. "Anyway," Georgina continued, "the doctors insisted we went to see Keith's body. He told us that the hospital had a very strict policy that loved ones should see their deceased relatives because it was extremely important for closure. So we followed the doctor down the hospital corridors into the room where Keith's body was lying motionless on a bed with a sheet covering his face. A nurse beckoned us into the room. She asked us if I was Keith's sister, and I said no, I was his wife. And before I even got to see Keith, the nurse flat out fainted before my very eyes. And, of course, in front of the kids as well. She collapsed on the hospital floor, and we had to help her up to her feet." "She what?" asked Morgan, looking completely stupefied. "You're kidding, right? Isn't a nurse supposed to be used to seeing dead bodies? Why the hell did she faint? I mean, you were the bereaved party here, not her. Why the hell did she collapse like that? It's insane if you ask me. What's wrong with people? Imagine going in for an operation and the doctor faints during your surgery. He wouldn't exactly inspire you with any confidence, would he? What's wrong with the woman?" "Well, at the time I had no idea. But we helped the nurse to her feet, asked her if she was all right. She was dreadfully embarrassed, of course. Danny rushed off to get a glass of water for her. She apologized for her fainting spell, and then pulled down the sheet to show us Keith's deceased body." "And it was him?" asked Fern, her eyes growing round. "Please, God, tell me it wasn't him, and the hospital made a mistake." "Oh, yes, it was him. Actually, if the truth be told, he looked more peaceful in death than he did in life, I thought. Anyway, after we'd seen his body, and were returning back to our car, my son Danny asked me a very peculiar question. He said to me, 'Mummy, is it normal for men to have lots and lots of lovers?' At this, Morgan's mouth dropped open. Good Lord! You're coming out of the hospital and Danny asks you that? What on earth? Pretty much. I told him that no, when you were married you were faithful to your spouse, whether it be your husband or wife, and that you didn't have lots of lovers, because that wasn't appropriate. That was when Danny told me that while I was at work during the day, that his father always locked himself away in the study, saying he didn't want to be disturbed because he was writing a book. He told me their father never ever made them lunch when they returned home from school, never helped them with their homework, never played any games with them, that they had to fend for themselves and make their own sandwiches. I mean, I couldn't believe that. Apparently he locked himself away in his study until I arrived home from work and started the dinner. I was furious when I heard this from my son. I have always trusted Keith to take care of our children's needs, but he never gave them any attention at all, and that makes me profoundly angry. Good Lord, gasped Morgan. Your kids have been fending for themselves all this time. What the hell is wrong with Keith? What was he thinking? That's exactly what I would like to know. I have no idea what the man was thinking. I've asked myself that question thousands of times over, believe me. Danny also told me that when I was away at work, their father was always shouting at them, so they weren't remotely sad he was dead. He then told me that one day when his father went to take a shower, he accidentally left the study door open. So he went over to the computer to have a look at the book his father was writing. But he said there on the computer he found that his father was talking to numerous women online, telling them he loved them. But he said he saw no sign of the book anywhere that his father was supposed to be writing, but just hundreds of messages to all kinds of different women from all over the place. At this startling revelation, Morgan and Fern's mouths dropped wide open. You mean to say Keith has been cheating on you by messaging other women? All the while, he never was writing his so-called bestseller. This is absolutely insane. Well, it's worse than you can imagine, said Georgina. Let's just say when I arrived home, I went to his study. And for the record, over the last 7 years, my husband has not been writing a book at all. He's been lying to me all along. He hasn't even attempted to write a novel. So I was duped, but it's worse than that. I discovered my son Danny was absolutely right, and that my husband Keith has been living a double life. He's been clandestining, messaging all kinds of women from all over the place and even abroad. So all those trips he took to fancy locations on my dime were to meet up with women for romantic liaisons and to enjoy fabulous holidays at my expense. My husband was even engaged to some of these women, but always making excuses about why he couldn't get married to them, not just yet. I couldn't believe it, but the biggest shock for me was when on his cell phone I found a photograph of the nurse that fainted at the hospital when I told her I was Keith's wife. He was also texting her, telling her how much he loved her. Her name is Rona. No wonder she fainted, said Morgan. She thought you were Keith's sister, but she realized the man she'd been seeing, who had just died of a heart attack, was actually married with children. That must have been a dreadful shock for her. Well, yes, she was extremely shocked, which explained why she was so teary-eyed when I met her. I contacted her when I got home. We had a long chat together with her on Keith's cell phone, where I was able to get her contact details. She said when she realized I was Keith's wife, and that those were our children, she was in dreadful shock. She said that he'd told her that he'd never ever been married. She was mortified to discover the man she believed she loved had died in hospital while holding her hand when he took his last breath. She was so apologetic to me about everything, telling me she'd never have dated Keith if she'd known he was a married man. I told her that Keith had been tweeting dozens of other women, not just her, that she wasn't the only one that he'd been dating on the side, and that he was also engaged to 4 other women besides her. She was appalled when she heard this. She said she'd been seeing Keith for over 6 months, and recently he told her he wanted to marry her. She claimed to have fallen for him hard, so she was heartbroken by his deception. And when he came into the hospital and had a heart attack, she thought the man of her dreams had just died, until she realized what she thought she had loved had just been a lie all along. Goodness gracious, said Morgan. Your Keith was far too busy messing around with other women, pulling at their heartstrings to actually write his book. He was a snake in the grass, wasn't he? I'd like to know where he got the time to meet up with this nurse. I mean, goodness gracious, where did he get the time for any of this? And fancy this nurse having an affair with him. It's such a small world, isn't it? Well, that's where it gets extremely interesting. Apparently, he'd often meet the nurse when my kids were at home. I guess they thought he was working in the study, when sometimes he left them to their own devices. Probably climbing through the window. It's big enough for a man to get through, you know. He abandoned your kids to meet up with other women, while they believed their father was working at home in his study. Shame on him. That's what I say. It's disgusting. Pretty much so, said Georgina, shaking her head sadly. It turns out that you were absolutely right about my husband, when you said he was exploiting me. But he was also exploiting my children. He didn't care about them a jot. He just saw me as a cash cow, I rather suspect, that was there to pay for his romantic liaisons with other women. It turns out he took this nurse on a trip to Hawaii on my dime. So yes, he's been playing dirty all this time. But I was far too clueless to realize what was going on under my very nose. Now I know why my children aren't that sad that their father is deceased. You'd expect children to be devastated, wouldn't you, when their father passes away? But my children this morning said they were happy he wasn't coming back. Turns out he had a habit of locking them up in the closet. Can you imagine that? Fawn was saying to me that now Dad wasn't around, he wouldn't be there to shout at them any more, or to lock them up. They both seemed so thrilled he's gone, as if I've given them the best Christmas present ever. That is brutal, admitted Fern, pulling a sympathetic face. But love has to be earned, doesn't it? And those children of yours did not feel loved by Keith. They must have picked up instinctively that he had no time for them. So I don't think it's remotely surprising that they're not very interested in his death. But more to the point, how do you feel, Georgina? I mean, I can't imagine the whirlwind of emotions you're going through right now. First you find out that your husband never even started writing that book, but has spent the last 7 years of his life flirting with other women online, proposing to some of them, and going off on fancy holidays with others on your dime. And then you hear he locks up your children in the closet and doesn't even look after them when they return home from school. It's sickening to say the very least. So he's been literally keeping lots of women's beds warm by the sounds of things. And looking after your children. No, he hasn't been doing that at all. I really don't know what I feel, Fern. That's a very good question. At first I was very numb, caught up in a bubble of disbelief, you could say. Then I felt duped and exceedingly angry with Keith for his ultimate betrayal, and heartily annoyed with myself most of all for being so blind-sighted about all this, for not to notice what was going on under my nose, and especially that my poor children felt so neglected by him. I do so wish they'd told me what was going on. But Danny said he didn't want to upset me. He's such a thoughtful child like that. I'm furious my husband never took care of both of them when they came home from school, and that they had to fend for themselves like that. And sometimes when they were at home, he disappeared to spend hours of the day with some fancy woman he met up with, because he crept out of the window, didn't he? Sometimes he also went out at night when I arrived home from work, claiming to be meeting up with some of his male friends. But I seriously doubt that was happening. But what did I do? I naively gave him the benefit of the doubt, believing it would be good for him to catch up with his friends. More fool me. That's what I say.
Don't blame yourself for this, Georgina. Your husband was treacherously masterful in his deception. You put your utmost faith in him. You believed in him, and he let you down. You weren't to know he was such a Casanova behind the scenes, said Morgan sympathetically. I've been looking at all our expenses. You have no idea how many fancy dinners and hotels I've been paying for over the last 7 years or so, that I knew absolutely nothing about because Keith insisted on managing the finances. I do feel like a prize idiot. Let's just say, if he was here now, I'd box his ears out.
But if any good has come out of any of this, I can honestly say I'm relieved he's gone. I mean, there'll be no custody disputes or stuff like that. The malignant cancer has gone from my life for good, and my children will be happier for it without him around. And do you know something? So will I, as dreadful as that may sound." "Well, I can't blame you for feeling the way you do," said Morgan. "The man was evil. Well, maybe evil's a bit extreme, but he was so vindictively treacherous. And now you know what he was really like. Well, I guess you aren't sorry he's gone. But it's still a dreadful shock. Is he going to have an autopsy?" "But of course he's going to have an autopsy. But the doctors are extremely confident that he had a massive heart attack brought on by major stress. They believe he must have a stressful job. They seem to think he's the attorney in our family. I didn't correct them on that score. I think when my husband realized I was about to find out that he hadn't been writing that book after all, he had such an overwhelming fear response that his panic was off the charts. And that brought on a massive heart attack, which killed him." "I'm sure you're right on that," said Morgan. "People have been known to die of fear. It usually leads to a cardiac arrest. The same things happens to fragile animals like mice and birds. They can have heart attacks brought on by terror. They'll drop down dead. A vet told me that once, you know." "Well, I certainly believe that is what happened to Keith," Georgina admitted. And later her theory was confirmed by the coroner, who believed Keith had had a massive heart attack brought on by major stress. "Why didn't you phone us and cancel tea with us today?" asked Morgan. "I mean, you're in such a dreadful state, aren't you? And I don't mean to be rude, but you look like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards, and I can hardly blame you for that. Goodness knows what I would look like if I'd been through what you had been through last night. If we'd known all this, we wouldn't have expected you to come here today." "But I wanted to come here today, to join the two of you for tea, as I always do every Wednesday. I didn't want to change the habits of a lifetime, did I? Besides, the two of you are very dear to me. You're like the sisters I never had. And I wanted to share everything that happened with the both of you. And also to tell you that I should have listened to you both a long time ago, because maybe things would be very different in my life if I had done so. You were both right on the money about Keith." In the weeks and months that followed, life returned to its regular pace, but it would seem both Morgan and Fern had been rather shaken up about what had happened to Georgina. They couldn't believe the extent of her husband's betrayal, which had given them both pause for thought. One day over tea again at Morgan's house, Fern arrived at the house looking slightly dishevelled. The woman all knew each other well enough to know if one of them was below par, and this morning Fern was not behaving like her usual cheerful self. She looked somewhat preoccupied and troubled, as if something was weighing heavily on her mind. Fern was opening up a Tupperware container and taking out large slices of cheesecake that she had baked the previous night, which she placed onto plates, while Morgan got the kettle on to prepare some coffee for the woman. "Fern, I have to say, these cheesecakes look absolutely delicious. You are the most marvellous baker. You really are going to have to give me some pointers, because I could never make anything like this," said Georgina approvingly. She gave Morgan's a sideways glance. It was in that glance they were both saying to each other, "What's up with Fern?" Morgan finally expressed her concern, as she could feel the tension in the room was pronounced, rather like a freezing cold chill in the air, and it absolutely needed to be addressed. Fern was trying to busy herself with the cheesecakes by way of keeping herself busily distracted. She looked utterly miserable, as if she'd been privy to some very bad news. Morgan privately wondered to herself if someone Fern cared about deeply had just suddenly passed away. Could that be why their friend looked so melancholic? "Fern, I don't know if you've noticed, but you're wearing your T-shirt inside out and back to front," she said rather gingerly. "I am?" asked Fern, looking bemused. She looked down on herself and flushed a little, her skin growing slightly red. "Oh, goodness gracious me, you're right! I suppose it was because I was in such a rush to get out of the house this morning. I just threw everything on, like you do, when you're sort of not really thinking properly. At least I'm not wearing two different pairs of shoes," she chuckled. That happened to me once, you know. I was wearing one red shoe and one white one, and it wasn't funny. I made out I'd done so deliberately." Morgan did not laugh at Fern's attempts to be humorous. She could sense something was up with Fern, but she needed to tread carefully, because at times Fern could be quite demure, and if she didn't want to talk about something, she tended to shut down. "Are you sure nothing's troubling you, Fern? You look a little what?" said Fern, snapping at Morgan. "So what? I got up this morning, put on my T-shirt the wrong way round. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with me, does it? At least I'm not wearing a different shoe from two different pairs. That happened to me once, you know. It wasn't funny. I remember I went off to church wearing one red shoe and one white one. I pretended it was a fashion statement I was trying to make." Morgan did not laugh at Fern's attempts to be humorous. She could sense something was up with Fern, but she needed to tread very carefully, because at times Fern could be very demure, and if she didn't want to talk, she tended to just shut down. "But are you sure nothing's troubling you, Fern? You look a little what?" asked Fern, snapping at Morgan. "So what? I got up this morning, put on my T-shirt the wrong way round. Big deal. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with me. Why are you overreacting?" Morgan felt as if she'd just had her fingers bitten off by a snapping turtle, but she wasn't easily put off. Something was troubling Fern, and she needed to find out what it was. "Fern," she said, her voice sounding unduly stern, "stop trying to pull the wool over our eyes. We've both known you for years. You're not your normal self this morning. And I've never known you to put on your T-shirt back to front. What's going on with you? Come on, tell us." It was then that Fern just burst into tears and began to blubber so much that neither Morgan nor Georgina could make out what was going on with their friend, or what on earth she was saying. Morgan gave Fern a box of tissues, and Fern pulled out a tissue from the box and began to blow her nose very hard. She then mopped away the tears from her eyes. "I don't know what to tell you. I don't even know how to tell you this. If I do, you're probably going to think I'm stupid. You're always going on and on about my having a fanciful imagination, aren't you?" Morgan made a face. "Since when has anything you've ever said been stupid, Fern? Of course we're not going to think you're stupid. Yes, you do have a big imagination, but who cares about that? Tell us what's up with you. Why are you so upset?" Fern began to burst into tears again. She blubbered, "I think my husband Cole is having an affair." There was a silence that descended on the kitchen, as two pairs of eyes fixed on Fern. It sounded completely incongruous and out of character for someone like Cole Radisson to be having an affair. Morgan wanted to suppress a laugh, as the very idea of Cole cheating on his wife just seemed ridiculous. Morgan had never told Fern that she thought her husband Cole was the most boring person she'd ever had the privilege of meeting. Usually when they invited Cole over for dinner, he fell asleep at the dinner table, and when he engaged in conversation, he always seemed to talk about fishing. He was a level-headed guy, to be sure, who lived his life by structured routines, and he worked in IT, doing what seemed to be a rather drudgerous job that he found interesting. Certainly he didn't seem the type who'd want to cheat on his wife. Indeed, if you were to make a list of the most unlikely men to cheat on their wives, Cole Radisson would likely be on top of the list. Morgan knew that she shouldn't be so quick to jump to conclusions because of what had happened to Georgina. Yet when it had come to Georgina, she'd always known deep down in her gut that her husband Keith was a rat. But when it came to Cole Radisson, she couldn't imagine any drama being attached to his name. So Fern's bold proclamations that her husband Cole could potentially be cheating on her had come as quite a startling surprise. Morgan briefly glanced at Georgina, who looked bemused by what she was hearing. She opened and closed her mouth like a startled goldfish, and no words came out. "Look," said Morgan, seizing the silence with a somewhat confident swagger. "I'm sorry. I have to say this, Fern, but there is no way on God's earth that Cole is cheating on you. I've known him for many years, and I assure you he's not the type. How can you say that, Morgan? You don't know my husband like I do," said Fern defensively. "All right, Then what makes you believe Cole is cheating on you? Asked Morgan. Well, I was looking for my dark glasses in his car. I thought I might have dropped them there. And that was when under the passenger side seat I found a woman's dangling earring that does not belong to me. Now how do you explain that one? Let's get this right. You found an earring, said Morgan, under your husband's car seat, and you think that means that Cole is cheating on you? It's not exactly a whopping amount of evidence to use against him, is it? Did you actually confront him about the earring you found? I hope you did. Of course I did. And for your information, I found the earring under the passenger side seat, not my husband's seat. But I asked him if he was having an affair, and guess what? He laughed at me. He thought it was so funny. I showed him the dangling earring I'd found, and he said that he had seen it, it looked familiar, and he told me it probably belonged to a woman he'd given a lift home from work, and that maybe the earring had come off her ear. He said she'd been playing with her earring on the way to her house, when they'd been talking about stuff as you do. He told me the woman's car was in for a servicing, and she'd asked him for a lift. But I think she had strategic designs on my husband, because she invited him in to have a coffee with her when he dropped her off. She's young, pretty and single, and I think she was making a play for Cole. Even if she was making a play towards your husband, it doesn't mean he responded. And your husband's story sounds plausible enough. He took a woman home from work whose car was in for servicing, and he was kindly dropping her off at her home. You found the earring under the passenger side seat. I mean, an earring can come off your ear pretty easily, I suspect. Why should you doubt your husband's story? He told you he innocently dropped her off at her house, and she invited him in for a coffee. So he was very upfront about it all to you. If he had anything to hide, he would have been in denial, wouldn't he? But he gave you what I believe was a very reasonable explanation as to why the earring was under the seat in the first place. It doesn't sound duplicitous to me at all. I'm not going to take his word for it, said Fern. I think he could potentially be having an affair with this woman. She probably made a play on him. He said he never accepted her invitation for coffee, but what if he's lying to me? Her name's Julianne Sawyer, and with a name like that, she's got to be absolutely gorgeous. Look, I don't want to disagree with you, Fern, said Morgan, but I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill here, over nothing at all. As for Julianne Sawyer, whoever she is, being gorgeous, as you say, I'm sorry, but good looks dissolve the moment a person opens their mouth, because if they're not likeable, no matter how attractive they are, it counts for nothing, because looks rarely are only skin deep. And I'd have thought you would realise that. Besides anything else, you're a very beautiful woman, Fern. So don't put yourself down or compare yourself with other people. For a start, I don't believe your husband is the type to have an affair anyway. And if he was so willing to tell you he dropped the woman off at her home and she invited him in for coffee, but he refused, if he told you all this, I think he's been very upfront, extremely honest, and very truthful. He's got nothing to hide, and with good reason, too. What's that supposed to mean? Asked Fern, raising a brow. Are you saying you 100% believe his story? This time it was, in fact, Georgina who answered Fern's inquiries. I think your husband can be trusted. I've always believed that about Cole. Whether you realise it or not, Fern, your husband loves you very much, and the kids too. Far too much to cheat on you. He'd never risk your relationship over another woman. Just because we discovered that my husband was so treacherously duplicitous does not mean that every other man should be tarred with the same soiled brush. Not every apple in the barrel is bad, and you and Morgan have been much luckier in love than I have been. You both have very nice husbands that are reliable and steadfast in their loyalty. You should be grateful for that. You shouldn't be going looking for a speck of dust on a clean surface for nothing. You're reading far too much into this, Fern, because yes, you do have an overactive imagination, which isn't serving you right now. You think my husband is loyal, do you? When he goes fishing every hour God sends. And believe me, Georgina, it's getting worse and worse. Every weekend he goes off fishing, leaving me at home. And I've noticed he's spent much more time at the cabin since I found that earring under the passenger side seat belonging to this Julianne Sawyer, which I find very, very suspicious. I mean, think about it. Really think about it. If he's having an affair with this Julianne woman, he could be entertaining her at the cabin. And I wouldn't know a dicky bird about it, would I? I don't trust this Julianne woman. She invited my husband in for a coffee that day he lifted her home. She didn't bother to get an Uber, and you have to ask yourself why. Maybe she's had designs on my husband all along. I know that Cole goes to our cabin that we have in the woods, where there's a stream where he can go fishing. But recently he hasn't missed a single weekend. What if he's taking Julianne Sawyer, who dropped that earring in his car, on a romantic trip to the cabin? He could be having a steamy affair with her. And then I wouldn't know anything about it, would I?
You're very right. He is having a steamy affair,
chuckled Georgina. Oh, so you think this is a joke, do you, Georgina? I didn't laugh when I found out about your husband's infidelity. I actually felt sorry for you. But you can't extend me the same favour, can you? It's all just a great big joke to you, isn't it? But guess what? I'm not laughing.
Oh, don't overreact, Fern. You take things far too seriously. Relax, will you? I'm saying is that I genuinely believe that, yes, your husband is having a steamy affair, but not with this woman Julianne Sawyer or whatever her name is. I think your husband is having an affair with his fishing rod, that's all.
Ha, 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 that's very funny, said Fern sarcastically. Why aren't you taking me seriously, Georgina? You think this is all a great big joke, don't you? Don't you care how I feel about this?
Because I'm sorry, Fern. The idea that Cole could be having an affair is nonsensical to me. I don't think he'd have the energy for one besides anything else. When he comes to dinner with us, he's always falling asleep at the table. I doubt he could manage an affair on top of you as well.
He works hard, he gets tired, but it doesn't mean he's not capable of having an affair. Why is the idea so preposterous to you, Georgina? I'll have you know Cole is a very good-looking man, and I'm sure many women in the workplace fancy him rotten.
I don't dispute your husband Cole is very attractive. Of course he is. And maybe there are women out there, like this Julianne Sawyer woman, who find him irresistibly attractive. But hopefully those women appreciate that he's a married man. What you fail to realize, Fern, is that your husband is always talking about fishing. He loves the sport. I'm sure he innocently goes away most weekends to your family cabin because he needs an escapism from the drudgery of work. I can't imagine working in IT is riveting for anyone. He's passionate about fishing, and there's nothing wrong with that. Many men enjoy going fishing, or they enjoy golf or something like that. It's a way of letting them, well, get rid of some of the stress of their day, unwind and relax. And that's all that's going on here. Do I think it's horrible that your husband insists on going on these fishing trips so that you and the children are left to your own devices at home? Absolutely. He should certainly make an effort to spend more time with you all. But some men get addicted to some of the extracurricular activities they engage in, especially if they do happen to have a stressful job. But in the case of your husband, I really don't think Cole is up to any hanky-panky. I think he enjoys fishing, and that's all there is to it. From what you've told me, Fern, he was very nonchalant about this woman, Julianne Sawyer, that he took home that day. I think the only smouldering affair he's having is in your own head, Fern.
You're making it out to be something it's not. You're acting all suspicious and jealous, and it doesn't become you. Shouldn't you give Cole the benefit of the doubt? I mean, during the course of your marriage, has he ever done anything to make you doubt his integrity? No, he hasn't. But I can't help the way I feel. I mean, what am I going to do if Julianne Sawyer is shacked up in the cabin with him for a dirty weekend? Or what if he's not going to the cabin at all?
but spending time with her at her apartment, getting frisky. Thinking about it makes me sick to my stomach, it really does. Ever since I found that earring under the passenger side seat, I keep imagining my husband with that woman, Julianne Sawyer. I mean, think about how your husband crept out of the house, Georgina, while your kids thought he was in the study, and all the while he was hooking up with other women. What if my husband is doing the same with Julianne Sawyer? Fern, you're comparing apples with pears. They're entirely different fruit. My husband was a liar and a cheater, but Cole is not any of those things, I am most sure.
Why not? People lie all the time, Georgina, especially if they're covering for their misdemeanours.
I don't know what my husband is getting up to, but he's going to that cabin far too much. And when he comes back, there's a definite spark in his eyes, I notice, like when we first got together. Maybe he's in love with this woman, Julianne Sawyer. I looked her up online. She's as pretty as her name. Oh, what am I going to do if he's having an affair with her?
I'm sure you've got the wrong end of the stick, Fern. I rarely do, Georgina insisted.
I personally don't believe Cole is cheating on you. You've put 2 and 2 together to make 7. I think that the fact that your husband innocently took Julianne Sawyer back home that day is true, and I don't believe anything untoward happened between the two of them. As for the fact that he coincidentally happens to be going to the cabin more regularly than usual, doesn't mean that anything fishy is going on. He's just probably got increasingly passionate about going fishing, that's all. All this idea about your husband having a steamy affair with Julianne Sawyer is in your head.
But what if it's not in my head?
What if he's shacked up with her? Said Fern. What if he's trying to pull the wool over my eyes, like your husband did to you, Georgina? I don't want to be complacent about this. I need to find out what's going on. It's driving me mad. So I take it that your husband Cole is going fishing this coming weekend to the cabin, said Georgina, wondering how she could possibly convince Fern that Cole was not anything like her late husband. Of course he is. And when he returns home, he comes back with fish for me to cook. But before you say anything, Georgina, said Fern, waving a warning finger at her, that doesn't prove he went fishing at all. Cole could have gone to the fishmonger, couldn't he? Bought the fish there, passing them off as his own. And I'd be none the wiser, would I? I know all the tricks in the book. I notice he doesn't bring home any stragglers, which in itself is very suspicious, don't you think? Georgina couldn't help but laugh at Fern's naivety. He probably doesn't bring back any small fish because he throws them straight back into the water. A good fisherman isn't going to hang on to small fish. He's going to set them free, so that they'll grow big. It's a waste to catch a small fish like that and rob it of its life prematurely when it's still young.
Well, I hadn't thought of it like that, Fern admitted.
I want to get this absolutely straight, Fern, and not beat around the bush, said Georgina. But you really do believe Cole is cheating on you. Am I getting you right here?
Well, I told you I don't know whether he's cheating on me or not. That's the whole point. But I do think it's odd he keeps going fishing these days. I know you both think that I've got a very suggestible imagination, that I probably shouldn't be channeling into my paranoia. But look at what your husband did to you, Georgina. My husband could be doing exactly the same thing to me. I don't think he would be having an affair with multiple women, but like your husband was. But I think he could potentially be seeing Julianne Sawyer. I mean, she invited him in for coffee that day. What if he didn't refuse her? What if she threw herself at him and he couldn't, well, turn away her coquettish advances? I mean, when he comes back from fishing from the cabin, he always seems so happy. He sings along to himself all the time. That's got to mean that he's in love with someone. But that person may not be me. What if he asks me for a divorce and he abandons me and the children? I don't think I could bear it if that happened. I love him so much. But how can I trust him after what your husband did to you, Georgina?
Do we have to go over this again and again, Fern? What are you not getting here? We're going around in circles, repeating the same nonsensical drivel all the time. Yes, I get it. My husband cheated on me. We know that happened. He was talking online to multiple women, many who he proposed to, including that nurse at the hospital. I may remind you, Fern, that you and Morgan smelt a rat when it came to my late husband's defensive behaviour. Whenever I asked him about the book he was writing, he kept fobbing me off, didn't he? You both thought he was using me, and you were right about that. You sensed something underhanded was going on there, even when I failed to see it myself. But Fern, your husband Cole, he's not wired in the same way as Keith was. I don't get why you can't see that. Cole is an easy-going guy who works very hard during the week at the office, doing a dreadfully dull job in IT. I can't imagine that's particularly riveting for him. He occasionally falls asleep at dinner parties, is genuinely quiet and demure by nature, and he just happens to have a passion for fishing, and there's nothing wrong with that. I honestly don't believe there's anything insidious going on here at all.
But supposing you're wrong about this? Supposing you are? And anyway, what do I do? Because I can't get the image of Julianne Sawyer out of my mind. I mean, her face appears to have cemented itself inside me, like superglue, and it just won't go away.
Well, that can't be good if you keep thinking about this woman all the time. I tell you what we'll do, said Georgina. I've had a great idea. Me and Morgan will make a deal with you. We'll go with you to your family cabin, making sure your husband doesn't spot us, and all three of us will clandestinely spy on him while he's out fishing, and see what he gets up to while he's staying at the cabin. We'll keep a beady eye on him all day long and see if he really is doing what he claims to be doing. And we'll also look out for any signs of Julianne Sawyer. Will that put your mind at rest? Either that, or you could hire the services of a private investigator who would follow him around all the time, but that would be a very expensive ordeal. Besides, she joked, I've always rather fancied myself as a bit of a sleuth, and I reckon I'd make a pretty good one at that, even if I say so myself. I also think Morgan over here is pretty shrewd, so the three of us can get some answers for you this weekend, and finally put that suggestible imagination of yours to rest, as right now it's running rings around you and causing you undue stress. And we can't have that, can we?
I certainly don't want to hire a private detective, Fern admitted fiercely. But I do like the idea of spying on Cole from the woods to see what he's getting up to all day, and if he really is fishing. Maybe if I see that he is, I can feel reassured that nothing untoward is going on with this Julianne Sawyer woman. Can you blame me for being so suspicious after what your husband did to you, Georgina? I mean, I always knew he was a tow rag, taking advantage of your kindness, and spinning you wild, exaggerated yarns about the so-called bestseller book he was writing. But let me tell you, not in a million months of Sundays did I believe for a second that Keith was chatting up multiple women in the way he was. It was when I realised what Keith had done to you, I lost a great deal of sleep at night. I thought to myself, if that can happen to you, Georgina, it could also happen to me, if you know what I mean. And from that moment on, I guess I became significantly more paranoid.
Well, I can't say I blame you for that. I can understand you're getting a little overwrought about things. You've always been a naturally sensitive soul like that. So we need to put your mind at rest, don't we? And that's what we're going to do. But we need to be very discreet and keep our wits about us. I'll bring my binoculars along. They're very good. So hopefully we can watch him from a distance. I'll also bring along a picnic lunch and some drinks, because I'm warning you, we might be in for a long haul. I assure you, Fern, if your husband really is only fishing, I hate to tell you this, but you're going to be in for one hell of a boringly long day. Indeed, we all are. I think watching someone going fishing may be equally as tedious as watching paint dry.
But you'll really do that for me, will you? Both accompany me to spy on my husband? It means the world to me, it really does. I'm so very lucky to have such loyal friends.
Well, you do the same for us, Georgina assured her. I mean, if the boot were on the other foot. I mean, look at how you both helped me in my tumultuous time of trouble, with all the shenanigans over the so-called bestseller that Keith appeared to be writing. If the truth be told, I doubt he ever wrote anything a day in his life. More's the shame, that's what I say. Believe it or not, I found out later that Keith never even got that English degree I told you about at university. Even that was bogus. Everything he told me in my marriage was a lie, and I guess he wanted to be a kept man. But the truth always has a nasty way of coming out, even when you try to suppress it. But I would put a year of my wages as an attorney on the fact that there is no conceivable way that Cole is cheating on you, Fern. That's how confident I am on this.
I'm so glad the two of you have so much faith in my husband. It makes me feel ashamed, because I keep doubting him, but I can't seem to help myself on this.
Don't apologize about that, Fern. None of this is your fault. We all have our own insecurities, don't we? Georgina reassured her. I just think that you should have shared your feelings with Cole about this matter. I'm quite sure your husband would have put your mind at rest and assured you that nothing was going on with this Julianne Sawyer. The last thing he'd want you to feel is insecure. Now, the big question I have about our intrepid adventure is where I'm going to park my late husband's Land Rover, for there is no way we are taking the trip in my Mercedes, and that is for sure.
Oh, don't worry about that, said Fern matter-of-factly. I know where you can hide the car, so my husband won't see it. There's a very old logging road behind the woodgrove, and if we take the trail through the trees, it leads to our family cabin, which overlooks the lake, and the fishing pier, of course, where my husband goes fishing. The wooded area, you'll be glad to know, is part of our family's property, so we won't be trespassing on private land.
If there's a woman around spending time with your husband, Fern, Georgina teased, we'll know about it pretty soon, because after our sleuthing this weekend, we're going to find the answers we seek.
When Fern had left Morgan's house after enjoying coffee and cheesecake with her friends, she really looked like a new woman. Her puffy red eyes were now clear and bright. She had put her T-shirt on the right way again, so she looked all the more well put together. When she had arrived at Morgan's house for tea that morning, she had almost felt as if the entire world was weighing down heavily on her narrow shoulders, as a little voice in her head kept taunting her and whispering,
"He's cheating on you, but you're too stupid to realize it. You're being taken for a prize mug, just like Georgina was. Do you really honestly believe that the earring you found under Cole's car's passenger side seat was so innocent? I mean, how did it get there? And how do you know Cole isn't making excuses for himself? How do you know he's not doing the unthinkable with Julianne Sawyer?"
Fern shuddered as she thought about Julianne Sawyer's name. She already hated this woman, even though they'd never ever met. Normally Fern would have wisely ignored those rude noises going on in her head, but after what had happened to Georgina with her husband many months before, and learning about his incessant cheating, had made her second-guess everything she thought she knew about her own relationship. She had become unduly guarded of late, for she would never allow what happened to Georgina to happen to her. No man was ever going to take her for a fool. Many women might ignore an earring they found lying under the passenger side seat of their husband's car, and not take it too seriously. But Fern had decided that she would go through her life with her eyes wide open, and if something was remotely amiss, as far as she was concerned, it definitely warranted investigation. Too many women gave their husbands the benefit of the doubt, but Fern wasn't prepared to do that, for finding the mystery earring had been exceedingly distressing for her. The very thought that Cole might be cheating on her with Julianne Sawyer had upset her so grievously that she had not been able to help herself. At Morgan's house, when she'd sobbed her heart out, it was, of course, reassuring that both of her friends genuinely believed Cole would not be cheating on her. They believed his only mistress was a fishing rod, and the only reason he was going to the cabin more frequently these days was he'd become more passionate about the sport. Even if her husband was innocent of all the accusations that were going on in her own head, that had no credible substance whatsoever. She needed to feel reassured, so this weekend trip would be a game changer for her that might potentially silence the inner demons of her burgeoning imagination. Fern hadn't visited the family cabin in the last 5 years or so, but her husband used the place religiously as a very relaxing fishing retreat. In the beginning, Cole had begged his wife to join him on these fishing trips, but Fern had found such adventures tediously boring, for she'd never been able to appreciate why her husband took so much pleasure from casting out a line into the water while waiting for something to bite. In her humble opinion, fishing was a solitary, rather lonely sport that held so little appeal to her. She preferred to do things that involved some kind of social interaction with others. She had, of course, asked her husband about the mysterious earring she had found under the passenger side seat of his car, and had not detected any duplicity on his part, but it doesn't mean he wasn't hiding anything, of course. He had very nonchalantly said, "Oh, yes, I do recognize that earring. It belongs to a woman from my work called Julianne Sawyer. She asked me for a lift one evening. I suppose she must have dropped the earring in the car. She was playing with them in the car, like some women do. I suppose it must be a nervous habit of hers or something. She does tend to always wear long dangling earrings." "But why on earth did you give her a lift?" Fern asked Cole, unable to hide the outrage in her voice, as she didn't like the thought of her husband giving a single woman, especially with a beautiful name like Julianne Sawyer, a lift home in his car. Cole had smiled at his wife teasingly and said, "Oh, goodness gracious, you're jealous, aren't you, Fern? I can see it in your face. You've gone decidedly pink. You look adorable when you're jealous, but you've got nothing to be jealous about, love," he said, sweeping her lovingly into his warm, affectionate arms. "I'm not remotely jealous," Cole Fern had said, pushing her husband away from her. "I'm just surprised, that's all. I mean, you drove this woman home, didn't you?" "But of course I did. What did you expect me to do? I could hardly refuse the woman, could I? That would not be a chivalrous thing for a gentleman to do, especially given that our home is not far from her apartment block." "But why did she need a lift from you in the first place? Why didn't she go home her usual way, or find alternative transportation? Why the hell did she ask you to give her a lift? I'm sure there must be other people at the offices that live reasonably close to her. Another woman, perhaps. But no, she singles you out for the special favour." "Well, I believe her car was in for servicing. She knew I didn't live terribly far from her, so it made sense to her to ask me for a lift home. You know me, I'm willing to help wherever I can. She's a nice enough woman, of course, so dropping her off home was no skin off my nose." "How well do you actually know this Julianne Sawyer, Cole? Tell me, is she pretty?" "I don't know her well, love, at all. I see her at the offices from time to time. We don't work in the same department. Where are you going with this conversation, if you don't mind my asking?" "You never answered my question. You're avoiding it, aren't you, Cole? I'll ask you again. Is Julianne pretty?" "Well, I suppose so," said her husband rather flatly. "But a lot of women are pretty. It doesn't mean anything, does it? And no, she isn't nearly as pretty as you are, if you want to know that. And I don't exactly think she's a bright spark. I seriously doubt that. Are you happy now?" No, I'm not happy, Cole. Don't fob me off like this. You're being awfully vague, and that makes me doubt your sincerity. I feel as if you're hiding something from me, and I don't like it one single bit. Did you give her a lift because you liked her, because she's pretty? Is that it? And by the sounds of things, she liked you too, given she was the one that asked you for a lift in the first place." "Of course I didn't like her. Not like that. The only woman I like and love is you." Cole had chuckled, shaking his head. "I think you're jealous, love. Look at you. I feel as if I'm being interrogated by the Gestapo. I am guilty of only one thing, lifting a woman home from work who asked me for a lift. Nothing more, nothing less. You know me. I'm loyal to a fault." "I still don't get why this woman didn't get an Uber home. You should have said, 'How about I call an Uber for you, so you can get home yourself?' That would be a better thing for you to do than give her a lift back to her place." "That's a very good question you ask, love. I have no idea why she didn't get an Uber.
It would have been the sensible thing for her to do. You don't know, Cole. How can you be so dumb? Isn't it blindingly obvious? It's what I've been saying all along. Julianne Sawyer must like you, and I mean really, really like you. You're not seeing her now, are you? She didn't invite you into her apartment for a coffee when you dropped her off, did she? As a matter of fact, now you come to mention it, she did ask me if I'd like to join her for coffee at the apartment. Oh, my goodness! You had coffee with her, Cole! How could you be so stupid? Didn't I tell you she was interested in you? How can you be so naively ignorant? Some women can be dangerous when they have their sights set on someone. Look, love, I did say no to the coffee with Julianne Sawyer. I certainly didn't want to go with her into her apartment, and I knew it wasn't an appropriate thing to do. So I came back home. Are you happy now? You promised me you're not seeing Julianne Sawyer, and this story is as innocent as you claim it is. I want to know the truth. I really do, Cole. What on earth is wrong with you, Fern? Ever since your friend Georgina's husband was discovered to be cheating on her, you're now trying to accuse me of doing the very same thing to you. I'm not a complete idiot, you know, with brain cells in my pants. You know me. I'd never dream of cheating on you. It's not in my DNA to do so. If Julianne Sawyer fancied me in some way, good luck to her, that's what I say, because she'd be left very disappointed. I assure you, love, if Julianne Sawyer had any interest in me, I certainly didn't reciprocate, because I showed her no interest in any way. I have my hands tied with you and the kids. Another woman would be far too much to handle on my plate. Besides, you're the only one for me, love. Why would I ever be interested in anyone else?
Fern desperately wanted to believe her husband Cole was telling her the truth, but she couldn't help having these dreadful visions of a beautiful Julianne Sawyer, leaving loving, suggestive messages on her husband's desk at work for him, and buttering him up at every opportunity, by buying him coffee and sandwiches at lunch break, and doing anything in her power to seduce her husband. Supposing Cole had been unable to refuse her cunningly artful, coquettish advances, that was far too awful for her to even begin to contemplate. She imagined Cole inviting Julianne Sawyer back to the cabin to go fishing with him, and for Fern these harrowing images in her head were so real, there was almost no reasoning with her, that she was overindulging in an imagination that was leading her straight up the garden path. If the truth be told, Fern had never known her husband Cole to lie to her a day in his life. But then again, there was a first time for everything, was there not? When she left Morgan's house after tea that Wednesday morning, it was Morgan who was the first to speak, as Georgina was still sitting at the kitchen breakfast nook, looking somewhat bemused about the fact that Fern was almost accusing her husband Cole of cheating on her, when there was no evidence to suggest that this was the case. "There is no way Cole is cheating on Fern," said Morgan. "She really has got herself into a pickle, has she not? For some reason she believes Cole is cheating on her. I think he's way too set in his ways to go off with another woman. Besides, he loves Fern and the children to death, does he not?" Georgina could not help but chuckle. "Honestly, Fern is the absolute end. She just won't see any sense, will she? She's got quite the overactive imagination on her. Always has, I'm afraid. The truth is, I blame myself for this. I think ever since Fern learnt about what Keith had done to me, she lost faith in men, thinking they're all hardwired to cheat on their women, which is absolutely not the case at all. Let's not kid. Women can be equally, if not more treacherous than men are on that score. This is why it's important we humour Fern, by going to her family cabin to watch her husband fish all day, because believe me, that is exactly what we will be doing." "You're absolutely right. That's what we will be doing," Morgan agreed. "Honestly, I've never known anyone to be as paranoid as Fern is. Where does she get this imagination of hers from? I love her to death, of course I do. But sometimes she gets a bee in her bonnet about things. She can never let things go, can she?" It was on a Saturday morning after Cole had left at first light for his weekend fishing trip at the cabin that Georgina arrived at Morgan's house to pick up her two friends. She was driving her late husband's Land Rover Discovery. The three women's children had been dropped off, at Georgina's mother's house the previous night, for the woman had kindly agreed to take care of all 6 children over the weekend. The 3 women climbed into the Land Rover Discovery and left Nova Scotia behind, heading towards Fern's family cabin. Luckily, Fern knew the way well, and after a 2-hour drive, Fern pointed to a sequestered logging road that was covered with muddy puddles from the recent rainfall, and looked somewhat precarious. "You should park the Land Rover Discovery on that logging road," she explained. "Then we can walk through the woods and get to the cabin without being seen by my husband. Of course, we're not going to go straight to the cabin. We're going to stay in the woods and watch the fishing pier from there. The cabin overlooks a large lake, and that's where Cole goes fishing. And from the woods, with the use of your binoculars, we'll get a great view of everything," she said confidently.
"It's a good thing I didn't bring my Mercedes for this intrepid adventure of ours,"
said Georgina, taking a rather reluctant and cautious turn down the logging road.
"Goodness gracious me, this road is in a bad state of repair," she complained, "and I think even for a Land Rover Discovery it's a challenge to undertake. But come what may, we're going to do it."
Georgina wasn't joking either. The Land Rover Discovery, although robust and hard-wired to overcome the most treacherous of terrain, didn't appear to appreciate driving through all this muddy sludge. It rattled and shook precariously as it pushed its heavy-duty wheels through the thick mud, leaving behind on its path a very distinctive set of tyre prints. The road was covered in big potholes that were filled with water, the windscreen was spattered with mud, and the whole drive down the road, that was liberally scattered with fallen tree branches, was not a pleasant one, to say the very least. Finally, Fern pointed to a path through the trees, and told Georgina to park her car adjacent to the path, which is exactly what she did.
"I'm worried," said Georgina, "that our return journey home down this road is not going to be as easy and plain sailing as getting here was. To date, I have never driven down a more challenging road like this. I'm not surprised, quite frankly, that this logging road has not been used for a decade."
The 3 women exited the Land Rover, and Georgina put on the backpack she had brought along with her, containing their food supplies. Her binoculars were casually slung over her shoulders. All 3 women were wearing practical clothes and robust walking boots, and soon enough they crossed the muddy road, sashaying down the woodland trail through the trees. Fern had brought a compass with her and a map of their family property, so it would be easy to navigate their way through the woods towards the cabin. But Georgina was not that confident that Fern really knew what she was doing. Still, they were here to support her friend, she reminded herself. It was reasonably early in the morning, and although it was summer, there was still a pronounced chill in the air, which was why all 3 women were wearing scarves and sweaters. But that would likely soon subside, when the sun finally chose to come out. The woodgrove was perfectly serene and peaceful, dressed in its grandiose green outfit of calm tranquillity, that was accentuated all the more by the cheerful chirrups of the birdsong. The path through the trees was somewhat overgrown and very bushy, so that often jagged branches would reach out and brush against the women's faces and bodies. Georgina got badly scratched at one stage along her cheeks, but she was not the type to complain, even though the scratch had drawn blood and was stinging quite badly.
"This isn't at all pleasant," she told Fern. "This woodgrove should be thinned out considerably."
Luckily, soon after Georgina had been complaining about the narrow paths through the trees, they suddenly appeared to widen, and the trek became infinitely more agreeable. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, the sun came out, and its warm, welcoming light trickled through the trees fearlessly, lighting up the entire woodgrove that was washed in an ethereal light. The women were soon laughing together as they walked down the path, and that was when Georgina stopped short in her tracks. "Shh!" she whispered very suddenly. "Listen! You hear that?" All 3 women stood very still and listened. They could hear 2 voices in the woodgrove, speaking in hushed tones that were so low it was hard to make out what they were actually saying. It was like hearing a radio from a long way off. And the distant voices were muted, so much so that the woman didn't know what they were saying. "What the hell is that?" asked Georgina, turning to her 2 friends rather curiously. "Well, it sounds like 2 voices, far away," said Morgan. "It's seriously weird, don't you think?" "This is my family property," said Fern, looking somewhat bemused. "No one should be here. Unless that's my husband, of course, with his fancy woman." "It's not your husband," said Georgina. "The voices sound distinctly female, although you can't hear what they're saying." The voices appeared to continue in their conversation, and then they faded, and the three women, somewhat bewildered by the oddly paradoxical experience, continued along the path until finally Fern stopped and said, "We're in the right place now. We're very close to the cabin. You see that tree over there? Well, we can stand there and watch the cabin from here. I know this tree well. I used to watch the cabin from here myself sometimes. You know, when I used to go exploring. This is the perfect place to watch my husband from the fishing pier." Georgina walked over towards the bushy foliage, pulling it apart like a curtain, and was surprised to see that this was indeed an excellent location to be able to spy on any activity that was going on at the cabin. Georgina used her binoculars and began to focus on the fishing pier that overlooked the lake, and sure enough she could see a man sitting very casually on a deck chair, with a cooler by his side, probably packed with ice-cold beers. There was a rod splayed over the water. It was as she suspected. Cole was fishing on the pier, and on closer inspection he looked extremely relaxed, as the sunbeams washed over his contented face, that looked reasonably well tanned, from probably having been spending so much time out of doors of late. Georgina sighed to herself. This was going to be a long day, even though the shimmering lake at this time of the morning looked absolutely beautiful. Cole was clearly not engaging in a steamy affair. The man was as boring as she always suspected him to be, and the only person he was having an affair with was his fishing rod. Georgina couldn't help thinking to herself how much more exciting it would actually have been to catch Cole red-handed, getting up to mischief with this Julianne Sawyer woman. It would certainly have made the day a damn sight more entertaining. But watching Cole fishing all day was going to be very monotonous and extremely dreary. But then again, dreary was a good thing on her friend's part. "What do you see, Georgina?" asked Fern. Her voice sounded a little panicked, as if she was bracing herself for the impact of very bad news. "Well, I can see your family cabin from here. I'd no idea it was so pretty. It really is charming, like something out of a fairy tale. Goodness gracious me, and that water on the lake, it just shimmers like a diamond with all the reflectant light from the sun, and the trees that are hanging over the edge of the water. I can see why your husband loves coming here. I mean, this place is paradise. I can see the fishing deck, and I can see it all very clearly, you'll be glad to know. But about my husband, can you see him? Is there a woman with him on the deck?" asked Fern, now sounding breathless, as if her heart was racing a dime to a dozen. "Yes, I can see Cole. He's sitting out there on the fishing deck, as I expected he would be. He's got a blue cooler by his side. The sun is streaming on his face, and he appears to look very contented with himself. But no, he doesn't have any company, and there are no other cars parked outside the cabin, except for Cole's, of course. So by the looks of things, he's out here alone, as we told you he would be, Fern." "Yes, but are you sure no one is with him? Maybe there's a woman still in the cabin, washing up the dishes after breakfast. Maybe they came together in his car. Maybe the woman is still in the cabin, and maybe that woman is Julianne Sawyer." "No one is with him, Fern. Relax," said Georgina, handing the binoculars over to her friend. "Didn't we tell you that Cole was not cheating on you? He's alone on that fishing pier, with his line extended over the water. Take a look, won't you?" Fern eagerly snatched the binoculars away from Georgina, and began to steadily watch her husband, who appeared to be completely relaxed, sitting back on his deck chair on the fishing pier. It really did look like Cole did not have any company, so maybe he hadn't been lying to her after all. But still, they needed to watch him for the rest of the day, just in case the situation changed, and Julianne Sawyer from work made her appearance, because you could never be too sure about that. The three women took it in turns to agonizingly watch the same boring scene from 1 hour to the next, and the day chugged along very slowly, like a train going nowhere. The view never changed, of course. Cole remained seated on his deck chair on the fishing pier, staring out at the glistening water, and knocking back one beer after another. Sometimes he occasionally wrestled with something on the end of the line. He would pull in a fish. When the fish were small, he seemed to have the good grace to throw them back into the water. But he'd caught 3 sizable-looking fish that he packed in ice and put in a bucket on the pier. Those were fish he'd likely bring home to Fern after the weekend was over. Georgina couldn't remember a time in her life she had been more bored, as watching coal fishing was not riveting at all, and it would seem by the way Morgan's eyes were glazing over that she too was exceedingly bored. Both women were clandestinely hoping that Fern would see sense and call it a day, realizing that watching her husband fishing all day long was completely futile, and that no, he wasn't doing the dirty on her after all. But annoyingly, Fern was not eager to give up on their investigations. She kept saying that maybe Julianne Sawyer was on her way to the cabin and would be joining Cole later on. The woman took it in turns to watch over the cabin, and they began to hungrily tuck into sandwiches and knock back bottles of water and cans of Coca-Cola to alleviate the dreadful dullness of the day. At one point during the long, laborious afternoon that was dragging on at a snail's pace, all of a sudden Cole got up from his camping chair and was staring out at the woodgrove, as if he was looking directly at something. "Oh, my God!" said Georgina. "Look at that! I think Cole senses he's being watched by us." For a long while Cole stood on the pier, looking distinctly disquieted as he stared out towards the woods. But then he shook his head warily and returned to his fishing, almost as if he was telling himself that the feeling of being watched was all in his head, and he was being unduly paranoid. It was in that moment that the 3 women heard the voices again that they had heard earlier in the morning, but the voices were coming their way. All 3 women hurriedly scrambled behind the foliage of a large, rambling bush to hide. Why they did this they weren't entirely sure, but they claimed as the voices got steadily closer and closer, they felt a growing sense of unease, so their instincts rolled into action, making them react quickly by hurriedly taking cover. They heard heavy feet pounding the ground, and the squeak of branches being pushed to one side. Occasionally they heard a twig snapping, and the rustle of a few leaves. The voices got clearer and clearer as they made their approach, and they were distinctly female, and they were speaking in a strange language that the women were not familiar with. Georgina's heart was racing in her chest as she tried to focus her gaze through the rambling foliage of who it was walking down the path, engaged in light-hearted conversation. It sounded like 2 women in a coffee shop, caught up in a casual chat about the weather.
Kilati, kulotoko, kilaki kwasi, lunotoloba, kinaki, sikatata kalato, konkolo sampi, hinati, kulatika, hontolosi. Georgina's eyes seemed to go a little foggy as she observed 2 lofty, shadowy, somewhat ambiguous figures swinging their overlong arms casually as they walked together side by side. All of a sudden the 2 figures stood very still. Georgina let out an inward gasp when she saw that the owners of the voices belonged to 2 female Bigfoot that were strapping in size and extremely intimidating. They had both stopped abruptly in their light-hearted conversation. Their dark, treacle-coloured eyes were focused directly on the large bush where all the 3 women had taken cover, where they used the foliage to their advantage in hiding themselves, and Georgina seriously hoped that they would not be seen. She thought she was going to wet her pants, she was panicking so much. Fern, on the other hand, thought she was going to drop down dead in any second. She was so panicked and startled by what she was seeing, while Morgan was so shell-shocked and kept pinching herself because she was certain she had to be dreaming. The 2 massively robust female Bigfoot were easily between 7 to 8 foot tall, possibly taller. They had a powerful stride on them, very sturdy feet, and very strong leg muscles. Their torsos were ripped, like that of a defined athlete that had turned to steroids in order to beef himself up considerably. But the 2 female Bigfoots would have made the world's strongest man look pathetically puny by contrast. They were covered in glossy dark hair, and there was something rather majestic about them. Georgina was breathing very fast, her chest rising and falling at a very quick rhythm. The 2 Bigfoots continued to stare at the bush where the 3 women were hiding. They chatted together backwards and forwards in a lengthy conversation,
Georgina was somewhat terrified, not because she was threatened by the Bigfoots, of course, but it was their Herculean size that made her feel very vulnerable indeed, because she knew that Morgan and Fern, and herself, of course, were no match for these formidable creatures. Kilakwika, no tolosi, tantwa, kolopanti, shukolosa. As she peered at them, they seemed benevolent and calm, yet she was absolutely certain the Bigfoots knew where they were. But she felt enormous relief when they continued on their way. But all of a sudden they seemed to walk backwards, and one of the Bigfoots sashayed directly towards the bush where they were hiding. Georgina was sure that the female Bigfoot was going to confront them. Instead they saw her putting her scarf that she must have dropped onto the shrubbery, as if she was returning a lost item back to them, which only highlighted the fact that those two female Bigfoots knew that the three women were hiding in that bush. It would have almost been comical if the three women had not been so unduly alarmed. The Bigfoots said something to each other, and then they ambled away. For a while the three women remained hiding in the shrubbery, almost too afraid to come out of their hiding place. And that was when they heard the feet again, in the woodgrove, although this time they seemed significantly lighter. All Georgina could think was, "Oh my God, they're coming back again! Please God, no!" All of a sudden they heard someone tearing away the scarf from the outer brambles of the bush, and then some of the bush was being ripped back, and that was when Georgina realized her boot was exposed from beneath the shrubbery, and she had given herself away. Georgina let out an ear-piercing scream, for she was certain the Bigfoots had returned, and the idea of a face-to-face confrontation with such powerful humanoid creatures was all too much for her to entertain. "What the hell?" came a familiar voice. It belonged to Cole, Fern's husband. "Is that you, Georgina? What on earth are you doing here, hiding in the shrubbery on my property?" That was when all three women came hurriedly scurrying out of their hiding places in the bush, their faces and hands badly scratched, their eyes wide, leaves and twigs caught up in their hair. "What are you doing here, Fern?" he asked his wife, looking bewildered and surprised at the same time. "Tell me something. Have you three women been watching me by any chance? I saw a flash of red from the sweater you're wearing, Georgina, from quite a distance on the fishing pier, and I was certain someone was there watching me when I was fishing, so that's why I decided to check it out. And when I get here I find a scarf dangling on a bush. I remove the scarf and then I see your boot sticking out from under the bush, and lo and behold, I discover you, Georgina, my wife, and you, Morgan, all hiding together in the bush in the woods, looking incredibly guilty. What is going on here?" "We just got scared, that's all," Fern tried to explain. "We heard voices. We panicked, I guess." "You didn't answer my question, Fern. Why are you in the woodgrove with your friends in the first place? And why do I get the distinct impression you three women were spying on me for some reason?" "It's not what you think," said Fern, trying to quickly cover for herself. "We thought we'd come here this weekend to surprise you, that's all." "You've got a funny way of surprising me, love. You're not making sense, love. I can't work you out. I don't know what on earth you're doing here in the woods, hiding in this bush. It's really, really sneaky. And all three of you are badly cut up and scratched by some of those brambles. Something's up with all three of you, and I want to know what it is. So go on, spill." Georgina couldn't help herself any more. She had to tell Cole the truth, but she wouldn't mention the Bigfoots they had recently encountered, because the story might sound a little preposterous, since she was still trying to get her head around what they'd just seen. "Fern thought you were cheating on her, Cole," she blurted out. "With a woman at your work called Julianne Sawyer, I believe." "Fern thought I was cheating on her?" said Cole, looking all the more bemused. "Fern," he said, looking directly at his wife, "what's up with you, love? We've been married for 20 years, for goodness sake. Surely you know me well enough by now. I've told you a dozen times over that I am not the cheating type, and I have no intention of ever cheating on you. Besides anything else, I love you, Fern, as impossible as you may be at times. And that imagination of yours, well, honestly,
It needs to be tethered a little. Are you really trying to tell me you thought I was entertaining Julian Sawyer at the cabin behind your back, while you were at home taking care of our children?
Well, what was I supposed to think, Cole? You admitted that Julianne Sawyer invited you in for coffee that day when you dropped her off at her apartment.
But I told you I refused her, didn't I? This is probably all my fault, Cole.
Georgina apologized profusely.
It was my idea for us to come to the cabin to spy on you from the wood grove, because I wanted to reassure Fern that you were not cheating on her. For the record, Morgan and I didn't believe you were the cheating type. But let's just say, after what happened with me and my husband, Keith, I think it's made your wife feel all the more insecure about your fidelity, especially when she found that earring under the passenger side seat. I guess it just fed her imagination with all kinds of wild ideas. But then Fern's always been like that, has she not? You think, Fern, all men are going to cheat on their wives? Is that it? Asked Cole with a frown.
I don't know what to think, said Fern. I had to be sure that you weren't cheating on me, Cole. I just didn't want to be taken for a mug, that's all.
Well, you must have had a riveting afternoon watching me fish, said Cole with a laugh. Honestly, Fern, what are you like, love? He said, pulling her in his arms and giving her a big kiss on the cheek. I'm very sorry to burst your bubble, sweetheart, but I have to admit I'm far too boring to be a cheater. One wife is quite enough for me, thank you very much, and it would take far too much energy to go chasing after other women, even if I were that way inclined. I like my life to be very simple, exactly as it is, thank you very much. And I'm very contented in my marriage with you. I don't need anyone else. I think that Fern was concerned because you go fishing every weekend. She was thinking that maybe something else was going on. She was wondering if Julianne Sawyer was being invited, to spend some time with you at the cabin. She needed to be sure of your fidelity, that's all. Good Lord, said Cole. You women are all the end, honestly. As for you, Fern, why weren't you straight and up front with me from the very beginning about your burgeoning doubts? I know what you are like. I would have put your mind to rest. For a start, if you wanted to check up on me, why on earth didn't you join me on this fishing weekend? We could have had a lot of fun together, brought the kids along with us for good measure.
I get bored, Cole, when you go fishing, said Fern rather lamely. I guess I should have trusted you, Cole. I'm a prize idiot, aren't I? Sometimes I suppose I think you're just too good to me, and that maybe there's something that I'm failing to see.
Look, love, you don't have to worry about me having a wandering eye. You're the most beautiful woman in my universe. No one can hold a candle to you, he said, taking his wife's hand. Even when you get old and grey and have more wrinkles on you than a crumpled piece of newspaper, you'll still be the most beautiful woman in the world to me.
I'm sorry I doubted you, Cole, said Fern. Georgina felt increasingly awkward and uncomfortable seeing the couple embrace like this so passionately.
I tell you what, Fern, you and Cole, I see, have a lot of making up to do. Me and Morgan will make tracks now, back to my car, to the Land Rover, on the logging road, and we'll leave you both to it. Why don't you spend the rest of the weekend with your husband? As you know, your children are with my mother. I think you can rest assured that your husband is definitely not cheating on you.
Fern thanked her friends for their help, and both Morgan and Georgina bid her farewell, while they made their way back to Georgina's late husband's Land Rover Discovery that was still parked on the logging road.
I can't believe what happened this afternoon, said Georgina. I'm still in shock. We saw 2 female Bigfoot, and I keep thinking to myself that it must have been a dream. But it definitely was not.
No, it wasn't a dream. We definitely saw 2 female Bigfoot, Morgan assured her.
Just when I thought things couldn't get more boring, 2 female Bigfoot showed up. They were looking directly at us when we were hiding behind the bush. So they knew we were there. I'm most sure of that. When the Bigfoot started to walk away, I thought to myself, thank goodness they've gone. And then one of the Bigfoot comes marching over to the bush. She was putting my scarf that I dropped earlier on back onto the brambles, because she knew we were hiding behind that bush. She was returning the scarf back to me. At that stage I thought I was seriously going to wet my pants, because that's how affrighted I was. I was sure she was going to confront us. But then she retreated again. And when I thought they were coming back again for the third time, by then I was freaking out, and lo and behold we discovered it was Cole, who had seen my boot sticking out from under the bush, and when he pulled back the curtain of foliage, there I was, looking like a prize idiot, I have to say. Oh my goodness, it was hilariously funny. You should have seen your face, Georgina. It was a picture. You looked stupefied when Cole pulled back the shrubbery and was staring at you. His face was also a picture. He looked as if he'd been stung by a bee. He looked stupefied. Goodness gracious me. I can't believe what happened today. It turns out your red sweatshirt must have been seen all the way from the fishing pier. You should have worn something a little bit more discreet, Georgina. What Cole must have thought, God only knows. At least the man's got a sense of humour. You have to credit him with that. But I think on the whole we've had a very good day. In the beginning it dragged on a little, but I guess seeing those Bigfoots will be something we'll never forget. I'm still doubting what we saw. It seems so surreal, does it not? I feel exactly the same way. The three of us saw those two Bigfoots, and we didn't imagine a thing, did we? When the Bigfoots came close to our hiding place, well, I had a heart attack almost. But they were chilled, were they not? They seemed benevolent and intelligent. But I think it was their great size and power that made me feel desperately vulnerable. I think the best thing I can compare it to is when someone tells you they own an elephant. And oh, don't worry, he's a very gentle fellow. You're very hesitant, aren't you, in approaching that elephant, even if it is easygoing by nature, because you're poignantly aware of the power that animal has. And you know how easy it is for the creature to trample over you, even if it's only by accident. And then you'd be seriously injured, would you not? I guess it's rather the same thing when it came to those female Bigfoot. They were very, very kind, though. I mean, I could see it in their eyes. But I couldn't help being completely intimidated by their sheer size. I think they made me feel very tiny. I know what you mean. But you've got to admit, it was a hell of a day. I'm glad that Fern has finally come to her senses, though. I knew Cole would never do the dirty on her. But when Keith cheated on you, I think Fern, who's a sensitive soul, began to doubt her own relationship. But she can see now that Cole is definitely a keeper, and would never dream of hurting her in any way. I felt quite jealous, actually, about the passion brewing between the two of them. Those two seriously love each other. In the years that followed, Fern did choose to accompany her husband on the occasional fishing trip, and eventually became a dab hand with a fishing rod, and began to enjoy the sport. She did finally tell her husband Cole about the rather bizarre Bigfoot encounter, but to date there has been no more sighting of Bigfoots on their property. The three women still remain the very best of friends, and Georgina, I'm glad to say, is now dating a very nice man, who she knows is a noble character. But the three women, when they get together every Wednesday, they regularly chat about that day, that in hiding they witnessed two remarkable Bigfoot females, and they consider it a privilege to have experienced such an unusual encounter. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.